other things.
Welcome to Vinnie Politan Investigates. The
Yeah.
whole point of a criminal trial is for the jury to render a verdict and tell the public what happened. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen.
Yep,
Karen
doesn't.
Reed was accused of murdering her police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe, but after a 9-week trial, the jury didn't answer the ultimate question. And now, what happened to Officer John O'Keefe is still a mystery. I've covered this case in depth on my weeknight show, Closing Arguments, and what you're about to see are some of the most important moments from that program as I investigate the tragic death of Officer John O'Keefe.
Karen Reed was framed, and the world knows it. If there is someone on that jury that denies that irrefutable evidence, we got a problem.
Hopefully he's going to be not guilty. Hopefully they have the weekend to think it over.
She's got to be not guilty. I don't understand how anybody can't see the science behind it. So it doesn't make sense to me that it's taken this long.
So, Mr. Lally, I'd like to hear from the Commonwealth first about due and thorough deliberations.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last one.
I'd like to hear from the Commonwealth first about your view on whether the jury has conducted due and thorough deliberations.
Your Honor, while I understand that they have been at this for a while, I would submit that they have not, and I would ask the court not to make such a finding. Reasons for that, Your Honor, this jury heard, I believe, about 29 days or so of testimony, 657 different exhibits marked as evidence, 74 different witnesses who testified before them. And while I believe they've been out for somewhere in the vicinity of 22 or 23 hours, what I would submit to the court based on all of that, as well as the complexity of the issues presented to them, they really haven't even had 1 hour of deliberation equivalent to 1 day of testimony to each of the days of testimony that they've heard.
Our view is that it's time for Tui Rodriguez, Your Honor. They've come back now twice, indicating essentially that they're hopelessly deadlocked. The content of this latest message is that they have been over all the evidence. Previous message said that they did an exhaustive review. This time they said that they have fundamental disagreements about what the evidence means. And it's a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of lack of understanding.
I think this has been an extraordinary jury. I've never seen a note like this. Reporting to be at an impasse. I do find that they're now, with the additional time that they went out without coming back Friday saying that they were deadlocked, is due and thorough deliberation. So I'm going to give Tui Rodriguez. So, Mr. Foreman and members of the jury, I have an instruction for you. Our Constitution and laws provide that in a criminal case, the principal method for deciding questions of fact is the verdict of a jury. You have been selected in the same manner and from the same source as any future jury would be selected. There is no reason to suppose that this case will ever be submitted to 12 persons who are more intelligent, more impartial, or more competent to decide it than you are, or that more or clearer evidence will be produced at another trial. With all this in mind, it is your duty to decide this case if you can do so conscientiously. I will now ask you, Mr. Foreman, and members of the jury to return to your deliberations with these instructions in mind. Judge Cannoni, despite our rigorous efforts, we continue to find ourselves at an impasse. Our perspectives on the evidence are starkly divided. Some members of the jury firmly believe that the evidence surpasses the burden of proof, establishing the elements of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Conversely, others find the evidence fails to meet this standard and does not sufficiently establish the necessary elements of the charges. The deep division is not due to a lack of effort or diligence, but rather a sincere adherence to our individual principles and moral convictions. To continue to deliberate would be futile and only serve to force us to compromise these deeply held beliefs. I'm not going to do that to you folks. Your service is complete. I'm declaring a mistrial in this case.
To say this is, I wouldn't, it's just really not the way anyone involved with this wanted this to end. I mean,
No.
I'm not wearing a red tie. There is no verdict. You cannot call this a verdict. It's the end of this particular trial, but it didn't end with a verdict, which means the jury did not come out and tell us what happened. There was no ruling. We're back to like square one in this case. Now, obviously, there may be people disappointed on both sides to different extents, but I think everyone can agree this was a really tough day for John O'Keefe's mom. This is brutal. Now, let's not forget what her family has been through. She lost a daughter, then a son-in-law, and then those children were being raised by her other son, John. And now John is no longer alive. She's lost 2 children, a son-in-law, and has 2 grandchildren now who have lost basically 3 parents. Completely unfair, completely tragic. And we know in every case when there is a family of the victim, they will never get closure. Their lives are never the same.
That's true.
They never forget. The best they can get at the end of the day is some sense of justice and be able to turn the page. And that did not happen for the O'Keefe family. You look at the prosecutor and the prosecution, they just did not get it done.
Was it terrible?
Didn't get it done. This is what trials are about. Criminal trials are about prosecutors coming into a courtroom, providing the evidence to convince a jury beyond any and all reasonable doubt. That's your job. That's your responsibility. That's what you need to do. And the prosecutor, his investigators, witnesses, however you want to put the whole group together, did not get it done. Now, as we sit here tonight, same can be said about the jury. The jury didn't get it done. All right? They listened to everything. They saw the same evidence. All 12 of them saw the same exact trial in the box. Nobody was sitting behind any witnesses. They all saw the trial. They heard the witnesses. They saw the evidence. They listened to the judge instruct them on the law. And despite that, they could not reach consensus. And it happens. It happens from time to time. You've seen other cases on court TV that have ended this way. What we don't know tonight exactly is were they at all close? But what we heard from this jury is
I
that
actually
each individual
want
jury
to come on the panel.
truly
You can let
believed
me
what
know.
they
I'll send it
believed.
to you.
That nobody was wishy-washy. That's what I heard. That's what I heard from this jury through the notes they sent out to the court.
Yep.
So while the prosecutor didn't get it done, and John O'Keefe's family is in a terrible, terrible place, is this a win for Karen Read?
Not
Is
really.
this a win? That's sort of an unanswered question. And the general thinking in our world of justice is anytime my client doesn't get in criminal justice, defense attorneys will say, anytime my client doesn't get convicted, yeah, it's a win. It's a win. But
Maybe I want to do a
this
cooking
case was
tutorial, like when I make dinner.
they
do
believe
that on
they
my
believed
YouTube channel.
someone
That'd
else
be
was
pretty cool.
responsible. They believe she's factually innocent, and they believe that they were going to win this case. Coming up next.
The community still doesn't know how this Boston police officer died, Mr. John O'Keefe. That wasn't decided today.
Friday nights, the WNBA is on ION. This week, the Mercury tests the fever. Then, the Lynx fly into the storm. Coverage starts Friday night at 7. Check local listings for games in your area. ION, it's on.
What made the Karen Read trial such a huge national story was not only what was happening inside the courtroom, but also the intense scene outside of the courthouse. Here's more of our investigation. Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson, who's joining us live from outside the courthouse in Dedham. Matt, great to see you. Long case, long deliberations. We ended up where we ended up. So how exactly did this day go?
been a very long day and a long trial. Nice to see you, Vinny. But, you know, we end the way that we started this 3 months ago. When I moved here 3 months ago, I really learned just how divided this community is. They still are tonight because the community still doesn't know how this Boston police officer died, Mr. John O'Keefe. That wasn't decided today. But we did see an outpour of support for this defendant once again today. Dozens of supporters turned into probably a couple hundred of people wearing pink, holding those signs, Justice for John O'Keefe and Free Karen Read. But this was the second day of the 5 days of deliberations that on the other end of the courthouse, probably 200 feet away in the other direction, we saw anti-Karen Read protesters. There's just one person right here in this video, but we've seen a handful of people here at the courthouse, and they clashed. They were peaceful. They were exchanging a lot of words, but they clashed. And the day started with all of the parties seeing all of these people out in front of the courthouse, along with the state troopers that we see each and every day. Karen Read walking in, looking very confident this morning. She walked with her attorneys and her new security detail, volunteers that made sure that she made it into court each and every day safely. She also changed her route at one point during the deliberations. We also saw, of course, the O'Keefe family that made it to court every single day. Peggy O'Keefe never missing a day, Paul never missing a day, and they were just looked defeated today. Peggy O'Keefe, you showed her earlier, broke down in tears when the Judge Cannoni, declared that this was going to be a mistrial. And just the thought of
I never liked it.
what's next and going through this again. Again, it was 2 weeks of jury selection, 9 weeks of testimony, 1 week of deliberations, and she still doesn't get an answer.
It's heartbreaking because you know all the tragedy this family has suffered, and you're left with nothing else other than you want justice, and that is what's on your mind. Now, after court, obviously the cameras are there, there are microphones, and the defense took an opportunity to make a statement?
The defense sure did. The first thing that I noticed was they went up to the podium where all the microphones were situated. They went out there and just spoke briefly, but they thanked their supporters. And they mentioned this. Take a listen.
Folks, this is what it looks like when you bring false charges against an innocent person. The Commonwealth did their worst. They brought the weight of the state based on spurious charges, based on compromised investigation and investigators and compromised witnesses. This is what it looks like. And guess what? They failed. They failed miserably, and they'll continue to fail. No matter how long it takes, no matter how long they keep trying, we will not stop fighting. We have no quit.
Alan, you're going to stay on?
Go ahead.
I just have two things to say, folks. Number one, I am in awe of the strength and courage of this remarkable client that I've had the privilege of representing since day one. And number two, I want to send a message to all of her supporters out there. Your support was invaluable. We are touched, and we ask for your continued support. I'm not from Texas like my colleague here. I'm a Boston kid, but I'll repeat what he said, which is, we ain't got no quit.
We ain't got no quit.
And that was pretty much the gist. It was pretty short, given
This
the
was a
fact
sign
that these
of
are
the
attorneys that love to speak to the
attorneys.
media
I think they
after
are.
court
I think
every
it's-
day, but they kind of clammed up during the deliberations. We also didn't hear from the defendant herself. She didn't address the crowd. She waved, and they got into an SUV right away and drove off. I didn't see them loop around and do the victory lap that they normally do at the end of each day and wave to their fans, supporters out here. They just got in the SUV and left. And, you know, she's not speaking because now she may face a round two with the Commonwealth. Vinny?
Yeah, I think that'll happen. I think it'll happen this year. Prosecutors issued a statement today, Matt?
Oh,
They certainly did. And you also have to keep in mind, they didn't come out here on the courthouse steps because really, as you know, Vinny, as a former prosecutor, they are
thank you for
strict under
liking.
different rules than defense. Defense can be a little bit more vocal. They still have a case in front of them. They released this statement to Court TV. Let's put it on your screen. It in part reads, first, we would like to thank the O'Keefe family for their commitment and dedication to this long process. They maintained sight of the true core of this case to find justice for John O'Keefe. The Commonwealth intends to retry the case.
Still to come.
I did a focus group with my entire audience on the Karen Read case, showing them different pieces of evidence. Who did they believe? 3/4 of them thought that Karen Read was innocent, and the other quarter thought that she was guilty.
Accomplice to Murder returns with an all-new season.
This is somebody he trusted.
This is in fact a murder. They were in this together.
Accomplice to Murder with Vinnie Politan. All new episode, Sunday night, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
This is true crime
All the
all
time.
the time.
We're live in courtrooms across the country.
We continue our gavel-to-gavel coverage.
This is what I love to do.
Judges instruct the jury on what the law is, but they don't really instruct the jury on the process of deliberating and reaching a verdict. That's left into the hands of the jurors themselves. And in Karen Read's case, it was clear from the jury's unusual notes that they knew exactly what they were doing. I want to bring in a special guest to talk about this jury, human behavior expert, jury consultant, Susan Constantine. Susan, great to see you. I want to read this note because I am still floored by the jury's note. This is actually note number 4. They were all incredibly well written and thought out, but here it is. Judge Cannone, despite our rigorous efforts, we continue to find ourselves at an impasse. Our perspectives on the evidence are starkly divided. Some members of the jury firmly believe that the evidence surpasses the burden of proof establishing the elements of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Conversely, others find the evidence fails to meet this standard and does not sufficiently establish the necessary elements of the charges. The deep division, this is the important part, I think. The deep division is not due to lack of effort or diligence, but rather a sincere adherence to our individual principles and moral convictions. To continue to deliberate would be futile and only serve to force us to compromise these deeply held beliefs. What's your takeaway, first of all, from that note?
It is really telling to me, and this is what I've spoke about on your show before when it comes to jury, is that it's difficult for some people to set aside their own personal core beliefs, values, and perceptions and look at the case and then form an objective opinion. In this particular case, what we saw was a mere image of what happened outside, a complete divide. And what we saw was stronghold beliefs they could not shake, could not move past, and both sides were opposing one another, and neither one of them, either side, was going to budge 1 inch. And that's what we had here. Very strong, very opinionated, very different views, which this is the reason why we had a mistrial.
So as we move forward to most likely a second trial, as a jury consultant, what would you say to the defense and to the prosecution in this case? Because both sides obviously want to win and be done with this. We know the defense considers it a slight win when the jury doesn't convict, but I think these defense attorneys believe they should win the case. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, first thing is, what can they live with? Not what they can't live without. So it may be that, you know, with Karen, I mean, she's got to go back to court again and then have this case tried all over again. Doesn't mean today was a win. It didn't mean it was a win or a lose. But if I were to advise either side, defense or prosecution, I'd revisit every single one of those expert witnesses that testified and also limit in the amount of information that was given to that jury over that length of time. It was overkill. I also think that it was overcharged. So they really need to re-strategize, regroup, and come up with a better strategy on both sides of the fence.
So what you're saying would be less is more sometimes.
I'm saying less is more.
And let me ask you one other question, because we talk about the public reaction versus the jury reaction being similar. We don't know the split or the numbers.
Right.
Would the split in that jury tell you anything about the next trial?
Sure, it would. And not only that, when we're looking at demographics, age, could be education, ethnicity, all of those demographic factors, one piece of it too. And then look at, because what could it be more female driven, more male driven? We don't know. But also, let's say it was 10-2. And let's look at the demographic profile of those individuals. That will give you insight. Then the next time it go around, I don't think they're going to have time to do any sort of focus group or mock trials because it's so far out there. I think they would evaluate this information and then decide what is a better mix of jurors that if they're going to be looking for in a new trial, who are going to be their dangerous jurors on both sides and get them off. And so that's the thing, is I think they had a little bit better strategy. And I also think that Karen Reed's attorney were a little bit too optimistic, let's just put it that way, to thinking that they were going to come in and do a slam dunk, and they found out they were wrong.
Every trial is a search for the truth, but in this case, that search ended without an answer. The jurors all heard the same testimony and saw the same evidence, but in the end, they saw and heard it differently. While it's disappointing for everyone, it's not the end. In fact, it's just the beginning, as Karen Reed remains cloaked in her presumption of innocence, and the prosecution must try to prove her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 different citizens. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thanks for joining the investigation, and I'll see you weeknights at 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Welcome to Vinnie Politan Investigates. When a police officer is murdered, there's usually an overwhelming reaction from the community. And when someone is charged with that murder, the community often wants that alleged killer off the streets. But in the case of accused cop killer Karen Reed, the reaction has been much different, much more divided. I've covered this case in depth on my weeknight show, Closing Arguments, and what you're about to see are some of the most important moments from that program as I investigate the tragic death of Officer John O'Keefe.
Judge Cannoni, despite our rigorous efforts, we continue to find ourselves at an impasse. Our perspectives on the evidence are starkly divided. Some members of the jury firmly believe that the evidence surpasses the burden of proof, establishing the elements of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Conversely, others find the evidence fails to meet this standard and does not sufficiently establish the necessary elements of the charges. The deep division is not due to a lack of effort or diligence, but rather a sincere adherence to our individual principles and moral convictions. To continue to deliberate would be futile and only serve to force us to compromise these deeply held beliefs. I'm not going to do that to you folks. Your service is complete. I'm declaring a mistrial in this case. I'll be in to see you privately in a few minutes. So thank you so much for your service.
Deep divide and people on both sides. And in the note, they're using the plural. So this isn't, it doesn't appear from the note, at least, that this is one holdout, that there was an actual divide in there with multiple people on both sides. So the judge has declared a mistrial. That means you go back to square one. Of course, the case can be retried, but let's get some reaction from our insiders. Back with us tonight, Karen Reed supporter, creator of the Justice for Officer John O'Keefe and Karen Reed Facebook page, Nick Rocco, and the YouTuber behind Yellow Cottage Tales, Kevin Lenahan, with us. Thank you both for being here. This is a big day. I think as the way it played out may not have been super surprising at the end, based on what happened Friday, today, and then finally this afternoon. Let me start here. Nick, I'll begin with you. Your feelings tonight, how you're feeling, and any word from the Karen Read camp on what the emotional state of everyone is.
Yeah, well, like what you said earlier, I don't think it's necessarily a win for Karen Read, because ultimately the end result that the defense team and I think all of her supporters was looking for was a not guilty verdict. And it seems by that note that it was maybe split as far as the way the jury was looking at this case. One of the jury members did speak out. I believe it was to another news station. Juror number 3 had said that, so she was an alternate juror. She wasn't with the final 12, but based off her handling of this case, being through the whole thing, she did state that she would have found Karen Read not guilty. So I think it's going to be very hard on a retrial to find a 12-0 jury to convict her. And I don't think Karen Read will ever see jail time if they do retry her.
Kevin, your reaction to how things concluded today, and is there any word on the emotional state of everyone? We saw the images of them, but any word from the John O'Keefe camp?
I don't have any word from the John O'Keefe camp. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why this isn't surprising. We know, I mean, I can tell you for a fact that the juror that was dismissed last week was telling people publicly in public places that she was a turtle rider and she was going to acquit. So she never should have been on the jury. This juror number 3 that became an alternate was wearing a pink dress to work when she became an alternate. So, you know, this is the problem with this case. You've whipped up this hysteria in social media. And so you get these kind of people that are going to sneak through onto the jury. And that's not to, in any way, obviously most of the jurors took their job very seriously. But I do think the state needs to do a better job. You had here bulletproof evidence, and that got lost in the way that they focused on things that maybe could be open to different interpretation. For example, even the I hit him. You could always argue, you don't know for sure, was she asking the question? Did people get their stories together later at the fire station? There's always that room for questioning there. But when it came to the bulletproof data that connected the vehicle data with John's phone data, there was no way to challenge that. And I just want to finish with this. The defense did not challenge it. They didn't challenge the fact that Karen went backwards 62 feet at 24, almost 25 miles an hour. They didn't challenge that the GPS showed that John didn't go in the house. So this stuff ties together in a way that really makes this an airtight case, but it was lost because of the presentation.
Nick, any response to that? Or you want to go on to the next thing? So I always want to give you an opportunity.
No, I think, no matter what me and Kevin say, right, these are our opinions at this point in the trial. Seeing how this unfolded, I do believe towards the end of the deliberation, I was thinking it was going to be more of a mistrial, but God, go on.
And you see the divide in the jury room. You see the divide on this program. So it's a very similar way. We're looking at the same evidence, and people are looking at it differently, and people are focusing on different parts of the evidence. And that may be in a retrial where things are different. Each side has to play on their strengths and keep the jury focused in those areas. Coming up next.
If there's reasonable doubt based on the state not entirely proving the accident, that's one thing. But accusing innocent people for which there's no evidence of being complicit in a murder and a murder cover-up, this has to stop.
A-list actor Alec Baldwin is cast in the real-life role he never wanted.
I turn a cop because the gun goes off.
Criminal defendant.
His lack of gun safety is something that he's going to have to answer for.
We heard that this was a toxic set.
One more.
It's not his fault. He did nothing wrong.
Is there an actor's exemption from liability when you're handling a deadly firearm?
The Alec Baldwin manslaughter trial. Live coverage today. Only on Court TV.
Folks, this is what it looks like when you bring false charges against an innocent person. The Commonwealth did their worst. They brought the weight of the state based on spurious charges, based on compromised investigation and investigators, and compromised witnesses. This is what it looks like. And guess what? They failed. They failed miserably, and they'll continue to fail.
These circus animals went down there to harass the O'Keefe family. Have some respect. A man has died. He has lost his life, and those children lost 3 adults that took care of them.
I believe that she's been framed.
At noon, prosecutors today dropping a computer hacking case against OnlyFans model and murder suspect Courtney Clenny and her parents. This after a judge found the state improperly gathered evidence against them.
NBC6's Tony Pipitone live at the criminal courthouse in Miami. And Tony, what exactly does this mean for the murder case against Clenny?
Well, really nothing that we're aware of yet. Today's dismissal only applies to the charges of unauthorized access to a computer, charges filed earlier this year by prosecutors who thought the Clennys and their lawyers were up to no good in texts and emails. But Judge Laura Sheeran Cruz found just the opposite, that the lawyers and clients were doing what she called the normal investigation of a criminal case. The prosecution, she said, had blinders on, assuming that lawyers and clients were engaged in criminal activity and seeking the password for a laptop taken from that house. If they were doing something wrong, the state could get around the attorney-client privilege, but they were not, the judge found. So the charges were dropped, giving some relief to Courtney Clenny's parents.
Finally, truth has prevailed.
In those
to say that this has been an ordeal for Deborah and myself. For
emails
held unjustly for a crime that she did not commit. But it's an ordeal we would gladly go through again 100 times over if it would provide justice for Courtney.
Their daughter, though, still faces a second-degree murder charge in the stabbing death of boyfriend Christian Abumseli in their Miami condo in 2022. Her attorney said if the state attorney does not remove itself from the murder case, he will ask the judge to do it for them, arguing the state attorney's office is tainted by what they read in those emails and texts. Now, Clenny has claimed that she stabbed her boyfriend in self-defense, but prosecutors say there's evidence that she was the aggressor in this relationship and therefore is responsible for second-degree murder. In a statement this morning, the state attorney's office tells me prosecutors did not know that Clenny's criminal attorneys were also representing her parents at the time that they obtained these messages, so they say they didn't know they were doing anything wrong, violating that attorney-client privilege, but they respect the judge's findings and decided not to appeal, leaving them no choice but to drop these charges against the parents and Courtney Clenny. Reporting live at the courthouse, Tony Pipitone, NBC6 News.
Wow.
Developing now, the parents of OnlyFans model Courtney Clenny, who was arrested for murder, going before a judge after being extradited to South Florida. The couple is facing charges in connection to their daughter's case, and for several hours today, the whole family was behind bars in the same jail. Local 10's Glenna Milberg is live in West Miami-Dade with the latest. Glenna.
Worth it to say, to your point, this story has gotten so much attention because Courtney Clenny is an OnlyFans model, but this is a real family tragedy at this point. Let me take you right to video of her parents just a little while ago. Deborah and Kim Clenny had bonded out of TGK. They walked very calmly. They actually waved to people behind them as they got into a car and left. They have been at this jail the last 9 hours after appearing in bond court today on charges related to a laptop at the murder scene where Courtney Clenny is charged with murder of her boyfriend, Christian Obumseli. Obumseli's laptop was found in the parents' possession, according to prosecutors, and that is why they are arrested. They're actually from Texas. They were extradited from their home in Austin, Texas, to face those charges, which they will in the next coming days and weeks here. Courtney Clenny is here. As you mentioned, she is charged with Obumseli's murder. She has pleaded not guilty. She has called it self-defense. And she and her parents in this same building after this 2-year now ordeal it just adds such sort of a sadness to this whole story, such a family tragedy here. The warrant in this case indicated texts between the parents and prosecutors about the laptop, about passwords, Right now, it's really unclear whether anyone had, like Courtney, had access or permission to access Obumseli's, her boyfriend's computer, what's on that computer, what they might have been doing with that computer. So that's all ready to hash out. But again, all the Clennys now charged in Miami-Dade with murder and computer access information. So much more to come on this. I'm Glenna Milberg.
Whoever's here, say hi.
Today, reporting live, Local 10 News.
And like and subscribe.
A new twist in the case of a former OnlyFans model accused of killing her boyfriend. Investigators say they have uncovered text messages from Courtney Clenny's parents. You see them right there, discussing hacking the victim's laptop after he died.
Jamie Gorilla is live in Miami with
Oh,
more on
that's
what
some
led to
other
the
kind of
parents'
stuff.
arrest.
He's guilty. I involvement. I find. What's that? Yeah. Let me see trials. Let's see what trials they give him. Oh yeah, this was good. I like this guy. I don't think people want to watch that. He's cute. How's everyone? I hope everyone's having a great day. Hit that like button and make sure to subscribe. I'm just having a soda right now, but and some water too, cause I gotta hydrate myself. Oh look, oh, it's Ashley. Alien. What's my phone? Let me see. Somebody texted me something. They wanted me follow up a case. Let me see. Let's see. Yep, it is good. RIO. Yeah, 20. Wow, so it's cute.
people that she still has not been found. Fox 13's Dave Detling spoke to them about their determination to find out what happened to Rio. Dave?
Talking to Rio Boyd's friends and family, they say despite what may have happened to her, she remains a part of the Spanaway community. It's been almost a year since she went missing, and they want answers. At the Mountain Valley Community Mobile Park, candles flicker for Rio Boyd.
Yeah, it's quiet in my house. I talk to my cats more.
Rio's father, Brian, says his daughter's disappearance has left a hole in the home. She's been missing since October 17th of last year.
Like when my daughter lived here, I didn't know probably a tenth of the people I know now.
Oddly enough, Brian says her missing persons case has opened his world, bringing him closer to neighbors.
It's opened up life. It's made things grow. It's a weird way of looking at it, but, you know, instead of being negative, life goes on.
We were filled with questions and uncertainty.
At Sunday's small vigil, Brian and those who knew her gathered and said a small prayer for Rio, hoping that someone somewhere knows what happened to her. Investigators say she was walking to a friend's house but never made it home. Her brand new cell phone was found off Field Road, a block from the mobile home park where she lived.
I think there's a lot of people that know something, but no one will say anything to the police that do know that something. Yeah, it's really sad.
The Pierce County Sheriff's Department says after her disappearance, rumors started circulating that Rio had been found, but those were not true. She remains missing. Since last year, there have been no new updates. It's frustrating, says Rio's stepsister, Jennifer Fennell.
I really hope that she's alive somewhere and is just kind of sitting there watching everything. I really hope she just kind of ran away.
While some people believe something nefarious may have happened to Rio, her father says right now he's focused on the light ahead.
It's the past. We gotta let it go. Personally, I think that's just the key to it all. We gotta move forward, and the future is more interesting. It's better for us. We can't live on the past.
And if you live in the Spanaway area or the surrounding neighborhoods and you know anything about Rio Boyd's disappearance or her case, give local police a call. In Spanaway, Dave Detling, Fox 13 News.
Interesting. But what happened to her? That is the good question.
Imagine falling and breaking your neck, but no one takes you to the hospital right away. Well, that is exactly what a local woman says happened to her inside the St. Clair County Jail.
Now she's trying to make sure something like this doesn't happen to anyone else. 7 investigator Heather Cataldo is here now with that.
Hi, Sean B.
Carolyn and Mike, Lisa Brown takes full responsibility for why she ended up briefly behind bars, but now she says a 20-day jail sentence has left her with a life sentence of partial paralysis and disability.
Lisa Brown says she's always loved celebrating holidays, playing with her dog Lily, and being outside. But now this 49-year-old from St. Clair says doing all of those things has become a lot more challenging after she fractured her neck.
I didn't know if I was going to live.
And it's what transpired after that injury that has Lisa pushing for change.
I thought, I can't move. I can't die in here. I got people that my family, it would destroy them.
Lisa admits she made a terrible choice when she decided to drink and drive.
I was very disappointed in myself.
On April 20th, 2021, a judge sentenced Lisa to 20 days in the St. Clair County Jail. 4 days later, Lisa says she was fast asleep on the top bunk in her cell when she rolled off and fell about 6 feet to the ground.
I fell asleep on the 23rd of April. Then I woke up on the floor. I remember myself falling. I could not move my body.
What was going through your mind?
Oh my God, I need an ambulance. And I truly believed the officers, when they came in, they were going to see my condition and get me to a hospital.
Lisa says she asked to go to the hospital repeatedly.
That's all I could say. And they were telling me to get up, get up, get up.
Instead of going to the emergency room, as you can see in this video obtained by the 7 investigators, several deputies wheeled Lisa out of her cell and into an observation room. The jail security video doesn't have sound, but Lisa appears to be screaming as her wheelchair hits the door to that room. Jail staff then put Lisa onto a mattress on the floor. And for the next 65 hours, Lisa lays flat on the ground, barely moving, except when deputies pull her to a sitting position at least 6 times.
I felt like I was being tortured. I was trying to tell myself to try and move your toes, try and move your hands.
Lisa did not know it yet, but she had a cervical spine fracture from the fall.
When someone's had obvious head trauma that could result in a cervical spine injury, they need to be immediately evaluated by qualified personnel.
Attorney Brian McKean is suing the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office and CHS TX Incorporated, the company that the county says they hired to provide medical care inside the jail.
If you further exacerbate the trauma by dragging somebody around and roughly picking them up and sliding them onto the jail cell, repeatedly grabbing her forcefully, that's the worst thing you can do to someone with an unstable cervical spine fracture.
McKean says the whole time Lisa was lying on the floor, she never ate and never once went to the bathroom. According to the lawsuit, Lisa wasn't sent to the hospital until late on the 3rd day after her injury. When she finally got to the emergency room, doctors noted that Lisa was only able to wiggle her right toes and fingers slightly and otherwise appeared to be paralyzed from the neck down. Court records show the doctor also said, quote, "It is felt as though the patient has a devastating injury."
The only thing that you could attribute this to is deliberate indifference. And how in the world somebody could just turn a blind eye and assume that maybe it's because she's faking it without ruling out a serious medical issue is mind-boggling.
Every single security guard is supposed to be trained on recognizing the signs of medical and mental health distress.
Loyola University New Orleans law professor Andrea Armstrong is a national expert on prison and jail conditions.
That's kind of
What
fucked
is
up.
the responsibility of the jailer when it comes to healthcare?
People who were detained or incarcerated are the only population in the United States that has a constitutional right to health care. The same way that a jailer can't deny someone food, they also can't deny them health care.
In court filings, the attorney for St. Clair County and the sheriff's office employees deny the deputies did anything wrong, and they're now suing the medical providers with a cross-claim. The county's lawyers said CHS TX Incorporated is paid over $2 million a year to provide health care to St. Clair County inmates, and their professional medical staff made all of the medical decisions in the case of Ms. Brown. Meanwhile, Lisa says in the nearly 3 years since her injury, she has pushed through hours of rehab to be able to walk again with assistance.
My arms, like, I can't, I can only lift, I can't, really do my hair.
And she says she no longer has full use of her hand.
I was supposed to do 20 days, and I ended up doing 6 weeks in the hospital with 2 neck surgeries. So they were moving me all around, and I had a broken neck.
The St. Clair County Sheriff declined to talk to us on camera. Also, attorneys for the medical staff and CHSTX have not responded to the 7 investigators' request for comment, but in court filings, they say that Lisa's allegations are just not true. Of course, we're going to follow this as it plays out in court. So
They're gonna lose because they should have known. Should I watch him? Yeah, I like this guy.
What Mr. Baldwin told you at the scene?
Not particularly.
Okay. Would it be helpful if you saw the video from the lapel camera of you and Mr. Baldwin at the scene and listen to it? Would that be helpful?
No.
That wouldn't be helpful to you, investigator?
Once again, if you watch the video of what this guy is saying, would that help? No. It's like, wait, what? If I literally showed you on video what he said, you don't think that would help?
I'm not denying that these statements were made, but I do not recall all of the information that was being stated at that time.
I understand that, but you're here to do your best, right?
Yes.
And you want to be fair to Mr. Baldwin, right?
Yes.
So you don't know that if I show you the video of you at the scene, it won't refresh your memory?
Again, that's a frustrated look on his face that he has to go up again in the middle of cross. I mean, I've seen lawyers badger witnesses. I would not consider this badgering. I think she's a difficult witness. I don't think he's badgering. In fact, I think he can get away with going a little harder at her. Morrissey ran all over Spiro today. I think it's Spiro, not Spiro. I always want to say Spiro, the Greek in me. How can the defense attorneys misconstrue the judge's ruling on Baldwin's admissions versus expert testimony? We're going to get there when we get to the hearing. Yellow pill. For me, Baldwin's own words in the interrogation and interviews undermine, I'm just an actor defense, declaring he's an expert with firearms. So that is big, and we're gonna see more about that today. Why is the judge allowing Morrissey to act like this? We'd have to ask the judge because I don't get it. Okay, after the sidebar, she agrees to look at the video. The next thing they do is, they're fighting about something, and he literally seems like he does not even want to deal with it. The way he looks at her, she talks to him, he doesn't answer. Just when you get into these situations, you look to the judge, you ask the judge to tell the prosecutor to talk to you, not me. It's like, judge, tell her to stop talking to me. We don't talk to each other during trial. We talk to you, we talk to the jury, we talk to the witness. She shouldn't be telling me what to do or asking me questions because he is getting really frustrated. All right, there's a little bit more of this we're going to play. We don't need to go overboard on it. Look at his face.
We need to approach. Maybe we approach.
Yeah, look at his face.
We may approach.
He asked her for a document. She won't give it to him. He's annoyed. She's looking at something. She says we need to approach. Look at his face.
We need to approach. Maybe we approach.
Yes.
Sorry for the interruption.
Okay. And then this is why I played this one. Because I only picked a couple of these, okay? So, and some people are saying, it's really interesting to me. People are saying he's really difficult to follow and it feels like he doesn't land responses well. The struggle is real. So I think that's at least partially because of all these sidebars and objections and, talking down to him. I really think that has something to do with that. So after this sidebar, after she interrupts, after she stops it, after we're up there for minutes, what does he do? How does he make sure the jury knows? The jury knows she just lost. She's being annoying. She's doing these interruptions. How does he make the jury know without saying it? Here's how.
Sorry for the interruption. I'm going to ask the court reporter to read back the exact same question.
Sorry for the interruption that she caused. He didn't say that. And that question she objected to and didn't want me to be able to ask? Court reporter, read it back exactly the way I asked it. Because it was okay and she lost her objection. That's how you let the jury know without actually coming out and saying it.
And on April 21st, 2022, which is after the search microphone. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yep, please share, like, subscribe, and turn on your notification so you can know when I'm live.
And that was truthful testimony and accurate testimony that you just gave, correct?
Yes.
And at the time that you sent it to the FBI for accidental discharge testing, which I believe you discussed on your direct examination, didn't you?
Yes.
So at the time you did that, you knew that the testing would cause this firearm.
Another one. I mean, this was like time after time after time. And I see people in chat being like, I don't know, I like him. I don't know, I like her. What's interesting about this is there are some things I really like about each of them and some that I don't. Or with him, it's more, I do think that he's getting a little bit flustered and annoyed, but it also seems like he's making a connection with some of the jurors or he's just totally dropping the ball and it doesn't have the best social awareness. But he definitely is looking at these jurors like, you guys see what I'm seeing, right?
At the time that this testing was ordered, you knew that the firearm would no longer be in the same physical condition you recovered it in, correct? Let's take a break. Thank you.
So he came back. He asks the same question again as a little indication. I won there. Okay. So then we go to lunch and we have some arguments. The state says the defense keeps saying Baldwin was ashen and so sad and upset. Yet he said to somebody else, we're going to go have a good time and planning a vacation with his family. I think that's a good argument the state made once again. And I think that Baldwin's team absolutely opened the door to this. And let's hear how the judge decides, because this stuff was not going to come in before the defense was asking all those questions of the witness yesterday. You know, wasn't Baldwin so sad? I mean, you've seen him before. Wasn't he, pale or whatever they said about that? And I want to hear how the judge rules.
It's relevant, and it goes both ways.
All right, thank you. The court makes the following ruling. Under 11401, it says it has any tendency to make a fact more or less probable than it would be without the evidence and the factors of consequence in determining the action. It is not only the issue of whether he committed the crime of involuntary manslaughter, it's also a relevant fact. And you all made that fact very important through Officer LaFleur yesterday. So I do find that it's relevant to basically respond to you all talking about how upset Mr. Baldwin was, and certainly that you considered that fact of consequence, and I'm deciding that this rebuttal information is of consequence.
I agree with the judge's ruling.
Also find that its probative value is not substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice and all the other.
So the next argument is they want to get Baldwin's statements about how he's experienced with firearms. He knows how they work. He knows what you should do, what you shouldn't do. He was kind of bragging about it.
They wouldn't be.
And there was a
They wouldn't be
previous
in the
court
freaking
ruling. The
trial.
defense says that they relied upon and didn't ask these questions in voir dire. They didn't ask these questions on cross-examining the first couple
Please
of
like
witnesses.
and subscribe. Thank you for joining
and
us.
They didn't discuss it in opening statement, and that prejudices them. Now, I think, and again, there was a question about whether or not the defense was misconstruing the court's order. If the court really changes her order, and it does seem like the court doesn't believe she's changing her order, but if she is, that's not harmless error. That's a major problem.
Thank you,
And,
third person. Say hi.
I think Morrissey is badgering the entire courtroom, somebody said. And Taria said, people think it's cool she's throwing the lawyer off. It's not cool. And
Please give a
frankly,
like to help the
there have
algorithm.
been appeals where the way a prosecutor has acted and disrupted a defendant's right to competent counsel could rise to the level of reversible error. They have asked for her not to do it, and I think if she really disrupts him the entire trial, they may have an appellate argument. It's hard to win on that, but I would guess it's going to be one of their appellate arguments if they lose. And yes, the family vacation, they were stalked by media. Yeah, that's horrible. I mean, I hate to see that happen to anybody, honestly. I hate to see that happen to anybody, but I think the defense really opened the door to this because the judge wasn't going to allow this in the first place. So let's hear how the judge rules on his discussion of firearms and things like that.
The lawyer, he's a good lawyer. He's a good guy.
This was related to, and I think I say it here where I talk about on page 154, which you left out. But this is to Mr. Nekus, where he's saying that the state Ms. Hutchinson would have died if there were a blank in the gun. That they were asserting that they were.
She's saying specifically what is being kept out is this expert's testimony, not Baldwin's words.
Going beyond live ammunition, and they were talking about that they expected witnesses to testify, in particular Mr. Carpenter, that blanks can kill as well, and that he should have known that. That's different from his own admissions of his knowledge, and I'm going to let the following in.
Blanks can kill. Interesting.
She's going to allow his own knowledge to come in.
I'm going to let line 13, right in the middle. Sometimes the wadding can come out. If you're closer, you can get a burn. It shows that he does have knowledge of guns.
Hang on, you just want to use, I see, I'm sorry.
And then on lines 18, 19, and I'm told even with a flash powder, you can cause contusions and you can do a brain bleed. And then
One time
it's never good when your own words come in
depending on the
against you.
merch.
That's often, as we say, the most damning evidence against you. And what's also interesting about this is he said a lot of stuff.
People make it.
And I think this is indicative that they're going to use a lot of his own statements. And he's pretty verbose and he says a lot of stuff, and he says it in a way that he sounds very convinced himself, and he says it convincingly. Will this come back to bite him? This is only one statement we're hearing so far. I think the jury's going to hear a lot. of his statements.
Yep, let's
Also,
go bite him in the
lines
ass.
1 through 5 on page 13.
And Your Honor, I do understand the court's ruling. If I may, just for the court, just to remind you, because I know we're dealing with the transcripts and we had these arguments earlier. So if I may, just to kind of perhaps refresh the court a little bit, part of what the arguments were about as well was the fact that the way that the grand jury presentation had gone, and that had not been focused on blanks. It was about live ammunition, live rounds, and that was the basis of what the knowledge must be in order for it to meet the elements of the charge.
This is what in the grand jury, Mr. Carpenter was talking about all these duties that Mr. Baldwin should have had, including the knowledge that blanks can kill. He said that he should have had that knowledge. Everybody has that knowledge when they talk about don't pointing the gun and things like that. And
so we're getting into his duty, right? If he is saying things like, oh, even blanks can kill, I know that. Well, then it doesn't even matter. If it was live ammunition, he knew you shouldn't point the gun and pull the trigger at somebody. I think statements like that are going to come out, and maybe he is going to
That's not good.
describe and prove his own duty. That's going to do him in. Laura,
He's
Peter,
fucked.
if you put the super chats to scroll along the top of the chat, people can reply to them now. It's a really cool feature. Kelsey, see if you can look into that. I don't know how to do that, but that sounds very cool. And you may have to do it like on the actual YouTube back page, not StreamYard. And we can talk to John, try to figure that out. But that would be really cool. That would be really cool.
I did not want to belabor the point that blanks can kill. Okay, but that's different from Mr. Baldwin's own assertions of the knowledge that he had with respect to guns. All right, next.
Your Honor, same argument from.
So, so I'm going to jump ahead to, this is the part where Baldwin actually walks out. And let's talk about how bad it was, if anything, but also listen to what Morrissey is actually saying when he walks out, which is why I think there was somewhat of an uproar.
You live a very, very difficult, but ultimately very narrow life. I believe, hang on, let me finish it a little bit. I think we've got like three or four pages, so I think it all kind of goes together. Hang on just a second. So this part, I mean, the part at the bottom of 18, it puts in context the part at the top of 19, and this goes directly to Mr. Baldwin's motivation to lie about pulling the trigger of the gun. I'm 63 years old with 6 kids. I can't rely on luck anymore. He's talking about his career and that he can't rely on luck anymore. This goes exactly to his motivation not to tell the truth.
So there are two very easy ways to look at this, okay? And a lot of them have already been in the chat. Why don't you throw in the chat how you feel about this? Do you feel like he was angry and he walked out? Do you feel like he just had to go to the bathroom? I think when he comes in, he has a coffee or some kind of drink. Was he just going to get a coffee and some kind of drink? Okay. Let me know what you think in the chat of Alec Baldwin leaving there and what the reason is. So there are two ways. Number one, absolutely. We sit there all the time. The most annoying thing is because I always drink just out of habit or drinking a coffee or water to keep my mouth from being dry all throughout the trial. Okay. So I constantly have to pee. The court gets annoyed with me half the time, especially like once you break the seal, as they say. It's like, I got to go to the bathroom again, judge. Sorry. Every break, got to go to the bathroom, got to use that bathroom. So maybe he just had to pee. Okay. I get it. But if I'm going to use context clues, I'm going to say maybe he picked this time to pee. And people saying disrespectful, there's no jury in the courtroom. I don't know what the rules are here. If the judge lets them, go to the bathroom, he doesn't have to be here for this. This is just an argument between the lawyers that the judge is going to make a call on. So he's not doing this in front of a jury. But the context clues that I get here are what the prosecutor's saying, but more importantly, his lawyer's reaction. His lawyer looks and he's like, oh, what are you doing? Then he looks to the side to talk to co-counsel who apparently talked to Alec Baldwin before he walked out. And he was still like, oh, crap. And then they needed to approach, which I think is kind of interesting. So let's watch it one more time. See if we can pick up on the context clues. So watch Spiro here. He's the most important context clue to me as a lawyer sitting next to my client. I wouldn't do this if I knew my client was just going to the bathroom. No big deal. My face would not look like this.
To Mr. Baldwin's motivation to lie about pulling the trigger of the gun.
I'm 63 years old with 6 kids. I can't rely on luck anymore. He's talking about his career and that he can't rely on luck anymore. This goes exactly to his motivation not to tell the truth.
Can we approach?
That didn't just look like a bathroom break that, everybody was cool with and everybody kind of knows was going to happen. That's just my guess. I don't know. I got to be honest. Oh, people are saying I'm in the way. Okay, hold on. I could see the whole thing from my screen. All right, we'll watch it one more time. Make sure I'm not in the way. All right. Last time here.
Motivation to lie about pulling the trigger of the gun. I'm 63 years old with 6 kids. I can't rely on luck anymore. He's talking about his career.
6 skin
and that
or
he can't
6
rely on luck
kids?
anymore. This goes exactly to his motivation not to tell the truth.
Can we approach?
All right. So again, people can determine whether they think that was important or not. I don't think it was the biggest deal in the world. Even if he was mad and he went out, it is what it is. He walked out. He didn't slam anything. He didn't scream at anybody. He didn't make a big disruption. He walked out. Big deal. I'll tell you what, it's not easy to sit in that chair. As a criminal defendant, as a civil plaintiff, as a civil defendant, when lawyers are talking bad about you, as if you're not in the room, it takes a lot. Okay? It really takes a lot. So it kind of is what it is. But I get why people, have seen it both ways.
I wouldn't be able to sit there.
All right, let's listen to the judge's ruling on this part.
But I'm going to let it in because of the lateness. I think this information is that helpful one way or the other, but I'm going to let it in because of the lateness of your redactions.
So she's basically punishing the defense for getting their redactions in late and allowing Baldwin's statements about, I'm 63, I can't rely on luck anymore, I have 6 kids, whatever it may be, that the state's going to try to use as motivation for him to lie about pulling the trigger or not. And to me, that's quite a sanction to the defense, that because they're so late in these redactions, like, we haven't seen a lot of judges hold lawyers' feet to the fire. And this seems like it's a little bit much to me, but I like to have a judge keep a tight courtroom. So I guess I'll roll with it. I'm surprised that she did that, but she's like, I guess I'm just going to let it in. But she also said she did it because she didn't think it was that big of a deal. Okay. After lunch, we get into the discussion. We've been wondering, are they going to talk about the fact that Hannah Gutierrez-Reed has been convicted? Are they going to talk about other criminal trials? We know she's testifying tomorrow. How much is the jury going to know about her? Well, we found out here at the end of his cross.
Go out to seek the source of that lethal round, right?
Please rephrase your question as to the word seek.
Sure. After you said what you said and the officer said what he said, is it not the case that you made it a priority to try to find the source of the lethal ammunition, correct?
Our priority was to find the facts of what had happened in this situation.
And one of the steps that you took that we talked about by searching the truck, by going to Seth Kenny, by getting a PDQ, one of the things you then did was you did seek out and try to find the source of the lethal ammunition, correct?
Yes.
And as you were doing that, you continued to work with Corporal Hancock, right?
Yes.
You would see her and the prosecutors often, right?
I would see Corporal Hancock more often.
And you testified previously about the search for the lethal ammunition at the trial of the armorer, correct?
Yes.
And a question came up at that trial.
So here we go. The trial of the armorer. So the jury knows there was a trial prior to this for the armorer.
Of this issue of, did Seth Kenny really provide the ammunition to Senator, right?
Yes, I believe that came up.
Okay. And eventually there was a verdict in that case, right?
Yes.
And a good Samaritan walked into the police station and gave you the lethal ammunition, didn't they?
After the Hannah Gutierrez trial, there was an individual that came to the police station and stated they had ammunition.
So the way the defense frames this, I was like, wow, there was a good Samaritan that brought this in after Hannah's trial? Holy cow, this is a big piece of evidence. That's what I'm thinking while the defense is crossing her. But just wait. Morrissey's waiting in the wings.
And they turned in the ammunition.
Yes.
And they gave it to you, right?
Yes.
And they told you that this was the ammunition that ended up with Seth Kenny that killed Miss Hutchins, right?
I do not recall all of their statements.
Who did you tell about that?
During that conversation, my Lieutenant Brian Brandel, was with me, and Detective Hancock was aware of that individual, that he had come to the sheriff's office.
And you never vouchered that and turned it over to the defense, did you?
It was a doc information situation,
I don't know what that means. Can you just explain it to me?
meaning that I was instructed by my lieutenant to create a doc info report on it.
And I mean, what does that mean?
We were documenting information that this individual came and gave this ammunition to us.
Okay, but you didn't, I mean, he told you it had to do with Rush shooting, correct?
Yes,
And he told you actually that he was a police officer in a neighboring county, right?
I believe he said he was a retired police officer. Yes.
And he told you all had been duped by Seth Kennedy, didn't he?
No, I-
In words of substance, didn't he?
I don't recall that. No.
Okay. And he said to you, I'm willing to fill out.
This, I mean, a cop comes to the police station, says they've been duped. A good Samaritan brings the actual lethal ammunition. I was like, wow, this is a bombshell.
What is the big bombshell?
No, I don't recall that.
He told you that the rounds came from a green ammo can, didn't he?
Sustain.
Did you take the rounds that were provided to you? By the way, they were Starline brass nickel primer live, weren't they?
I don't recall.
You don't recall?
The lady that cannot recall.
Well, it's information I can find. This was my response. But he told you the reason that he was coming in is because he didn't trust law enforcement on this case.
Well, you know what? She's going to object to hearsay, and you're going to say effect on listener. Well, you're going to have to lay your foundation better.
Everybody laughed because they're like, the judge just picked it up by now. What's going to happen?
You are.
So let me ask this question. How come law enforcement didn't voucher this with the rest of the evidence in the Russ case?
I'm not sure what you mean by the word voucher.
How come you didn't inventory it and put it with all the rest of the evidence in the Russ case?
I was instructed to put this in as a doc information case, which I did, and it is under that case number.
You buried it?
No.
Your lieutenant?
There is a supplemental report on it, and that was placed into evidence.
Did you ever turn that over to the defense?
I have not turned over anything to the defense. My information goes through the sheriff's office.
Are you aware of whether the sheriff's office ever informed the defense that the Good
This
Samaritan came in
girl
and turned in his
not
information?
know what the hell she's doing.
When the defense came to view the Starline brass nickel primer live ammunition with you, you didn't show them this, did you?
I did not have an evidence viewing with the defense. That was my coworker.
Your coworker didn't show this to the defense, correct?
I
Do
did
you
not.
have any reason to believe your coworker should show this to the defense, given that it wasn't put in the same inventory as the Russ case?
Yeah.
Did you or anyone from the sheriff's office ever tell the armorer or her lawyers that a Good Samaritan came in after the verdict and gave you this information?
I do not know.
But you do agree.
I'm still here, guys.
He did tell you that Seth said this was the evidence from the shooting, correct?
I don't recall what he stated, what someone else stated.
Who's that?
And you told him he didn't have to write a witness statement. Law enforcement was going to type up a report on it today, right?
I never stated any such thing about a witness statement.
He offered to provide a written witness statement so that it was clear. Did he not?
I do not recall that happening.
Okay. Did you give him assurances that you would type up a report on it?
I don't recall providing assurances to him.
Did you tell him that you would write up a report on it?
I don't recall doing that either.
You deny it.
So that's basically it. And he obviously thought that was really important because that's what he ended with. But Morrissey smushes this right at the beginning of redirect. Like literally, as long as I thought this was important, it was gone.
Witnesses in this case.
No, I did not.
You didn't interview Mr. Baldwin?
No.
You didn't interview Ms. Gutierrez?
No.
Mr. Spiro was asking you about the Good Samaritan who arrived at the sheriff's department
Why you
after
left
the
like
Gutierrez
this?
trial. Can you tell the members of the jury when the Gutierrez trial was?
My enemy yesterday.
I don't recall exactly. I believe it was back in April.
Everybody left me behind.
Would you take into February, beginning of March?
Yes, that sounds accurate.
Okay. Do you recall the Good Samaritan's name?
I do not.
So before we get into the Good Samaritan's name, badgered witness and a couple other people asked, was that supposed to come in? Everybody seemed perfectly fine with it. Nobody objected. Nobody seemed surprised. And now both sides have talked about it. So I think everybody was fine with the Hannah stuff coming in. Vera May, it was kind of similar, kind of different. I don't think there were any criminal charges in the Brandon Lee case. Bodie, I think what she's trying to say is he lied to say he didn't pull the trigger because he had to make sure he wasn't going to get in trouble for this. He didn't want to leave it up to luck, I think, but I don't know. We'll see how they use it.
Do you recognize it if I said it to you?
Yes.
Troy Teske.
Yes, that was his name.
Are you aware that Troy Teske is a close friend of Hannah Gutierrez Reed's father?
No, I did not know that.
Yikes. And again, that's not in evidence because she said she didn't know that. And that's just a question for the prosecutor, but I'm picking up what she's putting down.
Are you aware that Troy Teske had his own motivations for wanting to place blame on Seth Kinney to help Hannah Gutierrez?
Objection, meeting, objection, relevant.
Overruled.
Please answer.
Overruled. Judge is funny.
Actually, those are improper questions because they're outside. There's no foundation that she would have knowledge of this. So she shouldn't be able to ask her just to say this stuff. That's facts, not in evidence.
Now, to be clear, is Mr. Baldwin charged with involuntary manslaughter for bringing live rounds on the movie set?
No.
Is Mr. Baldwin charged with involuntary manslaughter for loading a live round into the gun?
No.
Has a person already been tried and convicted for those things?
Yes.
That would be Hannah Gutierrez.
To try to clarify some points, Starline Brass, is that a brand of ammunition?
Yes, it is.
Is it?
So now she goes through, she basically defends Seth Kinney, says he didn't do it. They go through the evidence against Hannah. And then she mentions an actor at the end. And she asks if that actor did his own safety checks on his weapons before he used them. And this witness didn't know. But I was like, my guess is we're going to get that information later and see how it applies to Alec Baldwin. All right. We are about to now, I'm going to slow it down a little bit because we're about to get to a very Italian witness. And he is Mr. Pieta. He talks about all the great protocols, how he, manufactures and they test their firearms and they're always safe and they're just the best ever, just no problem. And I'm thinking, well, does he know what they were since it left him to where it got to the movie set? Answer to that was no, but she did ask him this, and I thought this was very good evidence for the prosecution here.
Does your Pieta firearm revolvers get put through that test by ATF?
Absolutely.
And that's to test to make sure it doesn't fire on its own?
No, that test means that we have safety on the gun.
Interesting.
So let me hit these questions real quick because they refer to that. Michelle, was he asking questions he didn't know the answer to? No, I think he did know the answer. And also I think he wanted to ask his question because even if her answer was, I don't know, he wanted to get in that stuff about the Good Samaritan that Morrissey's like, that was Gutierrez Reed's dad's buddy who was trying to help Gutierrez Reed's dad and trying to hurt Seth Kinney, had his own motivations. It wasn't some Good Samaritan, and it didn't even turn out to be anything important that he turned over. Are there any other legal options available to Spiro/defense team to deal with the prosecutor's behavior? I would just at every sidebar continue to complain about it, put it on the record. This is a problem. She's disrupting. She's not making valid objections, etc. Brooklyn Basement, could the judge's silence lead the jury to believe Morrissey's behavior is typical in a courtroom? She acts like everyone in the room owes her rent money. If the defense doesn't object, the judge isn't usually going to jump in, but during breaks, sometimes the judge would say things like this. I don't know how the jury, that's one of the questions I have for you. One of the overarching questions of this video. How do you guys think a jury looks at this lawyer? Who does it hurt? Who does it help?
Are you familiar with how this particular gun fires?
What that mean?
Well, what does it take to
You need to
make
put,
it
you,
shoot?
you need to cock the hammer and pull the trigger.
What that mean? You have to cock the hammer and pull the trigger, and that's important. In his very thick, amazing Italian accent that I bet the jury loved. I mean, how could you not love this guy, right? He's got no dog in the fight, except he doesn't want you to say anything bad about his gun, right? But he confirms here for the state, you cannot fire this weapon without pulling the trigger. And they're going to have as many people say that as possible, and that's very important evidence.
Do you know this gun that you have in front of you will fire without a pull of the trigger?
Actually, this gun cannot fire because from what I see is missing some parts. So
Okay, I'm talking about when it was first.
This guy, he's like, this gun right now can't fire. It's missing some parts. Hit the like button if you guys haven't already, because we got Mr. Pieta in here.
of course.
Does it fire? Would it fire without a pull of the trigger?
No,
Why not?
because the mechanic, the design of the hammer, and the trigger has been designed since Samuel Colt made this gun to work in that way.
And can you explain under what circumstances it will only fire?
Well, when you cock the hammer, the trigger will engage the firing knock position. That is the farthest one, so the last position of the hammer. And if you want to release the hammer, you need to pull the trigger. The trigger is just a sear that locks the hammer in that position. And if you want to do that, you need to pull the trigger.
Okay. Now, is there also a manufacturer's warning about whether or not
So that's just a simple explanation. They get into the hammer and things like that and what could possibly happen, but a very simple explanation from a guy who makes the gun that you can't shoot it without pulling the trigger.
That makes sense.
To me, that's pretty good evidence for the state, right? And I don't think that that's going to be the last person to say that exact statement. Netwoman, since they finished filming the movie as a tribute to Helena, did they finally get new safety protocols on set? Have fun at Morgan Wallen tomorrow. Thank you. I hope so. I sure hope so. And I would think so, but I don't know the answer. All right. So defense gets up and predictably says, do you know what happened with this weapon from 2017 to 2021? He says no. And I was like, that's pretty good cross because we don't know what condition it was in when it got to Alec Baldwin until Justin Hill, the marketing guy that sells the firearms to from the manufacturer to like stores and stuff, says it was all good in 2021. Never had a complaint about the gun going off. Can't fire it without pulling the trigger. Both witnesses confirmed. And this is Justin Hill, just so we can see what he looks like. He was up for about 2 seconds. And then we finished the day with Corporal Hancock, who's the lead case agent. She basically gave her background experience, started talking about what she did, and we broke kind of in the middle of her testimony. So basically right at an hour, a little longer again, to give this breakdown of the entirety of day 2. The lawyering was the highlight for me. The arguments back and forth, the miserable objections. But I want to know from you guys, and I'm going to go back and read these comments later about what you think about the lawyering, how you think a jury feels about the lawyering. Hit that like button, though. If you haven't already, please make sure you hit that like button. We're just getting rolling on this trial. Make sure you subscribe if you're following the Alec Baldwin trial and hit the reminder bell.
Yeah,
so you don't miss
please
any
hit
of our updates.
subscribe.
We're going to be doing
Please
daily
like and
recaps, daily
subscribe.
breakdowns because you guys asked for it. And again, tomorrow night, I'm going to be at Morgan Wallen. If any of you guys are there, come say hi. Going with my wife and some friends. But I am going to do a breakdown of tomorrow on Saturday, and Hannah Gutierrez Reed is testifying. Whew. Only 2.2 thousand likes. Let's get those likes up. There's 9,000-ish people in here across Twitter and YouTube. Make sure everybody hits the like button, please. But that's all we've got for tonight. I'm looking forward to continuing this because I knew it was going to be a battle between these lawyers. So until next time, we are officially out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.
The Lawyer You Know.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back in. More documents filed in the YSL trial. We've got more from his lawyers, more from the state, more just haymakers being thrown by Brian Steele that you don't often see in motions, especially motions discussing judges. So we're going to get into that today. We're going to get into the state's response to the motion for recusal. We'll talk about what we think is going to happen. I'm going to have my dad on. So let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to discuss is Steele's motion, a supplement to the motion to recuse. The second document we're going to read is the state's response This was filed on July 8th. The state's response was filed yesterday. There's a bunch of attachments. We can go through kind of what those are, Dad, as we go. But this motion itself is 26 pages. The other one's 9. We're going to
Dang.
read those 35 pages, not all the attachments, of course, because we don't want to be here for hours and hours just reading and reading. But we've got a lot to discuss. We'll follow along and keep track of your questions to make sure we answer a ton of those on the way as well. So first comes now Jeffrey Wilson's a lawyers. Okay. This is the first footnote. This motion applies to lawyers Love and Hilton, in addition to Judge Glanville, as all three are material witnesses in the case at bar, and all will be called by Mr. Williams during trial to show judicial and prosecutorial misconduct. This motion also timely moves to recuse the Honorable Judge Krause based on the fact, so this is the judge that would be hearing Judge Glanville's recusal motion and deciding whether Judge Glanville will be off the case or not. And we already talked about this judge is within the same jurisdiction as Glanville. So why do they want to recuse Krause? Because she sits on the Fulton County Superior Court bench with Judge Glanville, and in April 2024, which was just 3 months ago, and in the middle of this YSL trial, Glanville contributed $2,000 to her campaign. And in April, she donated $500 to his reelection campaign during the trial. Undersigned counsel derives no happiness, says Steele, saying, this doesn't bring me any pleasure to file the supplemental motion. However, let justice be done, though the heavens fall. And actually, the heavens will not fall by unmasking biased and unethical members of the Florida bar, starting out with he. How unusual this is.
You slipped Florida in there. You didn't mean to say that.
Did I say Florida? Members
Yeah.
of the, sorry, not Florida.
Okay. This is the motion to recuse is not that unusual. It happens, regularly. However, as we see as we go through here, the things he says and the venom, I don't know if it's the right word or not, but these are very strong words he's using against the judge. And the fact that he went back and had somebody look at all the contributions that these judges had for their reelection campaigns and found these contributions, it was like a gold mine when they found them, because you don't see this very often. At least in Florida, you wouldn't see one judge contributing to another and then the other judge contributing back.
Whitney is saying that a new one has come out, and it says that only Glanville donated to her, not the other way around. So
She didn't donate
now with that edit. So maybe they didn't give to each other.
because he says it again in the motion.
Yeah, I know, but I think they're saying that another one came out where that's redacted. So people are saying, have you seen Krause's response? We're going to read the 2 newest documents we have today. If there's more, we'll do another video on it, because we got all the time that we're going to need just to read through these 2 documents. So here we go. The Honorable Supreme Court of Georgia has taught that a motion to recuse is timely filed if it's within 5 days that the affiant learned of the alleged grounds for disqualifications, including Saturdays and Sundays. This supplemental motion is timely, and he makes a little bit of an argument there. This timely filed supplement to the motion to recuse has also been timely presented to the Honorable Judge Krause and Glanville. In the case at bar, Judge Glanville's ex parte communication with a sworn witness, his counsel, lawyers Love and Hilton, and other representatives of the Fulton County District Attorney's Office are seemingly only partially captured by the court reporter. Okay, only partially captured, but we know from the Bumpus video that it got everything that was material and important, but nonetheless, maybe it was not the complete transcript. Glanville, lawyer Love, and Hilton have prejudiced and tainted Mr. Williams's trial so deeply, as Glanville has not acted as a judge, but morphed into an essential part of the prosecution team. The judge's conduct, including ex parte communication with the prosecutor during trial, resulted in the appearance of bias, requiring reversal of the convictions and sentences. And that's a case that he cited. Mandate USCR 4.1 mandates that judges shall neither initiate nor consider ex parte communications by interested parties or their attorneys concerning a pending or impending proceeding. Yet Glanville participated in these ex parte communications and then somehow attempted to keep the secret by referring to these meetings as privileged and described the improper secrecy as sacrosanct. And there's a footnote here. Sacrosanct means most sacred or holy, inviolable, immune from criticism. As shown herein, communication immoral and unethical, diametrically opposed to sacrosanct. Ex parte communications are presumed to be harmful error, and any conviction and sentence will be reversed unless the state proves that the error was harmless. A lot of this is, repetitive from some of what we've seen in other motions. Is there anything that sticks out to you there as additional?
No, nothing new. In fact, this motion is very repetitive as we go through it.
All right. He timely raised the objections. Canon Rule 2 of the Georgia Code forbids a judge from considering ex parte communication, as judges shall accord every person who has a legal interest in a proceeding or that person's lawyer the right to be heard according to law. Glanville embraced his view that the communication at this ex parte hearing were privileged. The judge shall not initiate, permit, or consider ex parte communications or consider other communications made to them outside the presence of the parties or their lawyers concerning a pending or impending proceeding, except communications for administrative purposes, emergencies, consultations with experts, or counsel, personnel, and settlement conferences. It's also clear that ex parte communications are presumed to have been made in error. And once a party has shown that a judge has received an ex parte communication, there is a presumption of harm that can be overcome only by an affirmative showing that the judge did not consider this communication.
Okay, that's an important word.
In this case, sorry, the lawnmower is like right outside my door. I don't know if you guys can hear that.
Well, the word harm is important, and your viewers should remember that, because harmless error is important. So it can be harm, it can be wrong, but if it's not something that makes a difference, they can still not reverse or not recuse based on it. So the word harm there is very important. We'll see that as we go through these motions.
All right, we'll continue. In the case at bar, there is not a scintilla of evidence to overcome the presumption that these impermissible, illegal, and unethical ex parte communications as captured in Exhibit B resulted in harm. Mr. Williams' case should be reversed on direct appeal if there is any conviction and sentence. And he compares other cases. As shown in the joint affidavit, here too as Exhibit A, Glanville not only conducted this improper and unethical ex parte meeting, Glanville therein acted as an advocate for the Fulton County District Attorney's Office as he dispensed legal advice and supported lawyers Hilton and Love. Their goal to have Mr. Copeland testify against Mr. Williams and the co-indictees. And he attaches their joint affidavit and the exhibit of the entire transcript, which we've read through together. In light of this ex parte proceeding, it is impossible to conclude that Judge Glanville is impartial and not a member of the prosecution team. Okay, those are more strong words. Judges shall disqualify themselves in any proceeding in which their impartiality might reasonably be questioned, including cases in which the judge has a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party or a party's lawyer, or personal knowledge of a disputed evidentiary fact concerning the proceedings. Judge Glanville has been derelict in his judicial duties and must be recused. Once evidence of the illegal ex parte Star Chamber meeting was revealed by undersigned counsel in the afternoon, lawyers Hilton and Love sat mute, while Judge Glanville found undersigned counsel in contempt of court and sentenced undersigned counsel to the longest possible time in jail for unmasking Judge Glanville's, lawyer Love's, and lawyer Hilton's improper, illegal, and unethical conduct. And we're about to read the state's response, and it's amazing how they view this ex parte hearing and how they view what happened with Mr. Steele, which we'll get to when we read that part of the response. But he is making, he's holding back nothing, saying, all I did was point out illegal, improper, and unethical conduct by this judge and these lawyers. In addition to violations of Georgia rules of professional responsibility, which would carry penalties up to disbarment, felony crimes, such as violation of oath of offices codified in OCGA. So potentially Steele will I don't know if he has referred them or made a complaint with the Georgia bar. Melnick and Bumpus, I believe, said they hadn't at this point. But it kind of sounds like that's where Steele's going.
Right, and he's probably going to ask somebody to investigate them for criminal activity. But the problem is the state attorney's office is the same state attorney's office they belong to. So the person you'd have to go to is probably the Attorney General of Georgia.
And we've seen similar things happen in other cases. All right, we're going to skip a paragraph ahead to this one. In the case at hand, the state cannot show Judge Glanville, lawyer Love, or Hilton's intentional and willful complicity in these ex parte communications was harmless error. So he's saying it was not harmless. As shown in Exhibit B, the improper influence and interjections by Judge Glanville and his two cohorts, calling them cohorts is quite the verbiage, from the Fulton County District Attorney's Office on Mr. Copeland's changed Mr. Copeland's stance not to testify against Mr. Williams. If Mr. Copeland refused to testify, all of his prior false inculpatory statements as to Mr. Williams would not come into evidence based on Mr. Williams' constitutional right to confrontation. Intimidations, tactics thrust upon Mr. Copeland by the combined work of Glanville, lawyer Love, and Hilton resulted in Copeland's decision to testify. So talk for a second about what he means there. So if Copeland never testifies, we know about all this other stuff that Copeland is saying as a lie. I made it up. I actually committed a bunch of those crimes. Well, in the past, he does pin it on some of the co-defendants that are here on trial. So if he doesn't testify, they're arguing that helps the defendants immensely. So explain why that is.
Well, if he doesn't testify, then they can't impeach him. And what they're doing is bringing in prior inconsistent statements when they're putting in these videos, saying, look, he's saying this now, but then when he was being interviewed by the police, he said this. And those prior inconsistent statements can come in if he testifies. If he doesn't testify, then there are no statements to be inconsistent with. So they can argue that those videos of the interviews with the police cannot come into evidence.
Yeah.
And when you say they, you mean the state. The
Right.
state doesn't really care. And that's why, and that was very clear in the ex parte meeting. They don't care what he says. Get on the stand, lie, don't lie, say you did certain things. We don't really care. We got to put you on the stand so they can cross-examine you, so we can play all these videotapes where you say all this bad stuff about the defendants, which again, testimony against the defendants that people have made in prior police interviews, especially snitches or people that flipped or whatever it may be, is appropriate. It's fine. It's fine for prosecutors to use that. But in this situation, it seems like they went above and beyond to try to make something happen and cross the line when they had these ex parte communications. Moreover, ex parte communications are so disfavored and repugnant that even if the ex parte communication would be cumulative of other evidence introduced at trial, same would not be harmless error because the ex parte communications are presumed to be reversible error. Mr. Williams' fundamental constitutional rights were trampled, ignored, and violated as a result of Judge Glanville's, lawyer Love, and Hilton's improper, unethical ex parte meeting with Copeland. Moreover, the cover-up, like you said, the cover-up is worse than the crime. The cover-up, secrecy, and silence of these three team members is unforgivable. To wit, after the Star Chamber meeting, the three public officials, in quotes, simply strolled into the courtroom, faced the cameras, called for the jury, and feigned to continue the trial as if nothing out of the ordinary occurred just hours and minutes before.
Keep in mind,
YouTube. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's right. I'm just saying that, you keep in mind that he is thinking of how many ways can he say that there's a conspiracy between these three. He's using different words in different paragraphs saying the same thing. In this case, he's using the word, the three public officials, the three team members. He is really emphasizing it, right? He's really emphasizing it to the appellate court or to whoever judge hears this. To whatever judge hears this, to make sure the judge doesn't have any mistake about what Mr. Steele is saying.
Yeah, I mean, it really is.
Important.
It's about as disrespectful as you can be with a lawyer in a respectful, pleading, because he's basically taking every shot he possibly can at Glanville and the prosecutors. But I thought it was very interesting that they cited YouTube and put the link in there and put literally the timestamps. I mean, the fact that this is becoming so commonplace in legal documents now is really wild, really wild. Crazy Cat Queen said she introduced a bunch of criminal classmates to you and we're watching you live. Can we get a go Knowles for my classmates and a few lawyers? Go Knowles. Are you telling me you're at FSU College of Law right now? That would be wild.
Oh, that's great.
That's awesome. 2 grads here. Mr. Williams needs to examine Judge Glanville. So this is now saying, part of the recusal, they need to become witnesses. Mr. Williams needs to examine Glanville, Hilton, and Love, and all other members of the prosecution team to reveal the date, time of every ex parte communication, because that's true. Did they have any others? Are there more we don't know about? Concerning Mr. Williams' case since its inception, the subject of the same, and order the court reporter to produce any transcript of same and or unseal all documents from these potential improper ex parte communications. Underside counsel needs to cross-examine all of these parties to ensure that the sworn testimony is spread in open court on the record. Mr. Williams' trial is constitutionally broken based upon the unconscionable misconduct of Judge Glanville, Love, and Hilton, all working together in an effort to convict Mr. Williams. The criminal justice system in Fulton County, in the state of Georgia, and in America has been attacked by the conduct of these three actors. This injustice must end immediately, beginning with Judge Glanville removed and disqualified from Mr. Williams' case, Thereafter, this motion is also timely made for lawyer Love and Hilton to be removed and disqualified from Mr. Williams' trial, and Fulton County District Attorney's Office must be investigated for their improper conduct, if any, outside of the actions of lawyer Love and Hilton.
Okay, again, we're seeing where Mr. Steele has found another way to say it. These three actors, now they're actors, now they're cohorts, team members, and then he's bringing in, which is interesting, not only the state of Georgia, but the entire country is affected by the actions of these three. So he's really putting as much emphasis, he's really building it up here.
And he's not wrong.
No.
I mean, he's not wrong. The world is watching. This can't be how it is. If this just gets swept under the rug and we keep going forward and, we make some excuse about what people think about the defendants or what people think about the lawyers or whatever, and we just keep rolling, that's really not a good look for the justice system across the nation. It really isn't. The judges must scrupulously avoid improper ex parte communications, whether or not they consider them. The judge has an ethical duty to recuse himself sua sponte anytime he's aware of grounds to do so. We know Glanville didn't do that. He did the opposite of that, as they argue in this motion. No hearing is actually needed to reach the finding that recusal of Glanville in Stanter is mandated. Glanville has automatically caused his recusal and disqualification from Mr. Williams' case by unlawfully becoming actively involved when he presented argument refuting the affiant's allegation of judicial bias. I don't know if I agree with him there. Do you agree with that statement?
No, I don't.
I think it's
Yeah.
just that's a bridge too far, maybe potentially. But he's
But
going
he's got to make these allegations because he doesn't know what the response is going to be like either. So why not throw everything he can?
Mr. Williams respectfully requests a hearing as he will call Judge Glanville, lawyer Love, and lawyer Hilton as witnesses to fully unmask this above discussed misconduct, as well as further misconduct that may have occurred. Again, a lot of this is getting a little repetitious. We're about halfway through almost. The judicial and prosecutorial misconduct denotes a disgraceful episode in Fulton County courts, the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, and stains courts throughout the state of Georgia and the country.
And the country again.
What occurred in the Star Chamber outside the view of the cameras in the shadow and hidden from Mr. Williams and his counsel is unpardonable and a violation. I mean, he's going off the top rope. As the Honorable Supreme Court of Georgia has taught, justice faces its greatest threats when courts dispense it secretly. Our system abhors Star Chamber proceedings with good reason. Pretty good quote for what they're trying to do here. They conducted their illegal and unethical conduct outside the view of Mr. Williams and the public, outside the lens of the camera. They are public officials doing this. They should never be trusted by Mr. Williams or his counsel. As sworn to in Exhibit A, Judge Glanville, lawyer Love, and Hilton conspire to conceal and suppress Brady material. The Star Chamber cannot prohibit Brady evidence from coming forward. That's exactly what Glanville and the lawyers planned to do. Again, I mean, I actually think that is a pretty good argument. If they wouldn't have been called out.
No, go ahead. It is because remember, we have to show harm. And here we're showing a constitutional harm. Brady's a constitutional case saying that the state, everybody must turn over anything they know about exculpatory evidence to the defense. So if they can connect this ex parte hearing to the fact that they're withholding Brady information, it makes it a constitutional violation. They've really done a good job of establishing their harm.
Right. And the reason for that is knowing that this guy was going to potentially say he committed some crimes that the defendants would have been charged with is like literal prototypical Brady. It is like the third party culprit that they might want to point the finger at, regardless of the involvement in the gang stuff and whether or not, he's involved or trying to help him or whatever. That is Brady evidence that the defense has to know about and has to be able to present to the jury. All right. Talk about his due process rights to cross-examination, to see, hear, and be present for everything that's important. The Star Chamber meeting between those three undermine the public's faith and integrity in the justice system. Like, he's laying it on thick. He's like, he's basically saying, whoever decides this motion, are you guys going to side with them? Are you all part of the same smart tech here? You're all on the same team. You don't want to be with those guys. Anti-justice, people that do things in the hidden shadows away from the camera. The injustice must end today, he says. Judge Glanville and the indecorous Star Chamber, again, he's really stretching his vocabulary. Ex parte meeting provided legal advice and direction to Attorney Bumpus about how to speak with her client, Mr. Copeland. Dispensing legal advice creates a clear appearance of partiality, which is a proper ground for granting of this motion to recuse under our Code of Judicial Conduct and a constitutional violation of due process.
Yeah, they're continuing to build their case of harm because they anticipate that some judge is going to say, well, this may have been wrong, but it's harmless error. And that's what they're anticipating. So that's what they're creating here, is creating as much harm. So now we've got a Brady violation. Now we've got a due process violation, and he's going to keep going.
Yeah, this is anything but harmless is what they're trying to say.
Right.
Not only is there an appearance of partiality, but there's actual bias of Glanville. It's been embroiled in this trial. We've watched some of those clips together. Steele has brought it up multiple times. And this is what we always say. This is why you protect the record. This is why every time a problem comes up, Steele goes up there, he makes his record, he makes his argument. When he loses, he goes back and sits down. But guess what? When something huge happens, like this ex parte meeting, now you have record evidence of all the problems, all the reasons you think Glanville is biased, all the issues that have popped up in this case that you can stack on top of each other and then create this mountain that he's presenting in this motion. Glanville had an ethical duty to recuse himself, and he didn't do that. He leaned on Mr. Copeland to testify. He coached Attorney Bumpus on how to sell it to Mr. Copeland. He coached Mr. Copeland on how to deliver his testimony and promised Mr. Copeland that he would not be prosecuted even for perjured testimony unless he told a bold-faced whopper lie. These public officials heard and failed to reveal to Mr. Copeland that Mr. Copeland confessed to committing every indicted offense in this case. And again, whether or not you think Copeland's telling the truth or whether he would have gotten picked apart at another time, I get all that. And that's all fine and good. But that's for the prosecution to do. If the prosecution wants to prove how that's not true, that's fine. The defense is entitled to present that to a jury, and the jury will make the call. And maybe the jury would never have believed Copeland, but that's not the question. That's not the point. All right. We've got a lot of law students in here. Rain said she's studying for the MPRE and following along with our coverage. That's cool. Well, this is a case where you can learn what not to do ethically, potentially, as a lawyer. All right, what else we got? Glanville should not be rewarded with the opportunity to continue to provide over this case.
Probably be a great lawyer.
These three lawyers must be recused and removed from the case. It's important to note Glanville originally denied Mr. Williams' request for access to the ex parte transcript. That's true. We can't forget the fact that his first response in action was to hide it and deny access to it and call it privileged. And then he literally changed course immediately when he realized, of course, it's not privileged, which is exactly what Steele said the day the ex parte hearing happened. Fortunately, mounting pressure related to Glanville's gross misconduct, violation of his oath, ethical violations, potential criminal conduct by Love and Hilton, and Judge Glanville worked to effect change. On June 17th, Glanville denied undersigned counsel's motion to recuse and went forward in the case. Then he denied Weinstein's motion to recuse and then continued to unlawfully preside over the case. He must be removed as he has proven to have actual bias as well as the appearance of bias. Undersigned counsel has never been afforded the questions that Lawyer Hilton and Lawyer Love created and gave to Mr. Copeland. Do you think they're entitled to that? I don't think they're entitled to that.
It depends. If they gave it to the judge, they might be entitled to it. Remember, we saw it in the transcript, and it was like kind of came out of nowhere because we didn't really see where did the judge know that Ms. Hilton had questions that she had already written out for Copeland. And if Copeland used that to prepare for his testimony, they are entitled to it as well. So if they gave him the Copeland to prepare for his testimony, the defense is entitled to it because they're entitled to anything that Copeland did or saw in preparation for his testimony.
That makes sense.
Glanville's been made aware of these questions and encouraged Attorney Bumpus and Copeland to review and understand these questions. The questions must be asked why Mr. Glanville has ex parte access to Lawyer Hilton or Lawyer Love's questions for a witness. The conduct is beyond repair. Lottie asked, Steele added Glanville, Love, and Hilton to his witness list. Why not Melnick and Bumpus? At first glance, he really wants to prove that these three need to be witnesses. And they're now on the witness list, which proves he may call them. Bumpus and Melnick, he could still add later if he wants to. He can still call them. They're not prosecuting the case. They're not presiding as a judge over the case. So it's just different to call them versus these three. It's very unusual to call the judge and prosecutors on your case.
Right. The odds are that Bumpus Melnick would cooperate. And so they're not really worried about subpoenaing them and having their testimony. They don't think they're going to get a fight out of Bumpus and Melnick. They know they're going to get a fight from the judge and the prosecutor.
Yep. Miss K, it's a good question. We just not one we can know. Azam, long time. We usually read them in chunks. Yes, hit the like button, please, if you guys haven't already. I always forget to say that in these for some reason. I don't know if it's having somebody else on or what, but hit the like button and subscribe to the page if you guys haven't already. Okay. So the three public officials, as we'll call them, did not give a hint that they were meeting ex parte with witness Copeland or at any point. Undersigned counsel had no idea that this was happening and that these ethical rules were being broken behind closed doors. They had a duty to immediately announce this to Mr. Williams, and they didn't. And he repeats all the reasons why. Glanville, Lawyer Love, and Hilton, acting in concert, hid Brady evidence and attempted to normalize this unconstitutional Star Chamber meeting.
Another way of saying the same thing, acting in concert. Like I said, he must go to a thesaurus and find how many ways can I say the three of them were acting together. Now he's using the word concert.
And again, all of this is really interesting context before we read the state's response, because he says they're trying to normalize this behavior and act like it was no big deal. Just wait till we read their motion. This misconduct undermines the trust in judges, and prosecutors cannot be rewarded. Action must occur in order to attempt to remove this dark cloud over Mr. Williams' trial and criminal justice system at large. Georgia courts have always safeguarded and separated prosecutors and their duties from judges and their duties. That's important. You know, I've had a lot of people ask me on this show, and if you want to just give your comment, Dad, people always say, how is it fair? Why is it fair that the government pays prosecutors, judges, and public defenders? How is that fair to a criminal defendant? How are they all not just always in cahoots together?
Well, they're not responsible for each other's salaries. That's the one thing. A judge's salary is set by the legislature, and it comes out of the general budget. A prosecutor's salary, again, is set by the state attorney in that particular district. The state attorney's salary is set, then he determines what the assistants are going to get. Same thing with the public defender. That is set by statute, and he decides what his assistants are going to get. So it comes out of the general fund, but no one controls what the other one is going to make, how much they're going to make, or whether they're going to get paid or not. So,
additionally speaking, the government that pays them is individually interested in what each produces. So the government is interested in fair and just prosecutors, in fair and impartial judges, and public defenders that will defend the rights of the citizens and taxpayers in that jurisdiction. So it's not like the government wants everybody to go to prison or the government wants everybody to go to jail. They want fair and just prosecutions, defenses, and judges. So each one of them has their role to play, and the government is interested in all of their roles, and so are the citizens that pay the tax dollars that pay these people, right? So we have to remember that as well. We say the government, we say the state, they represent the people of the state of whatever, but in reality, each has their own function.
Well, the theory is the prosecutors are ministers of justice. The theory is that prosecutors are not supposed to prosecute innocent people. So, they're the ones that make the decision who gets prosecuted or not. So they've got the greater responsibility. And that's the theory.
As stated in here, Mr. Williams intends to call Judge Glanville as a witness at trial, as well as at this recusal motions evidentiary hearing based upon his improper conduct and the need to make a further record to protect Mr. Williams' constitutional rights. Specifically, there appear to be communications not captured on the transcript of June 10th. Ex parte meeting, lawyers Love and Hilton and Glanville. Examinations are needed to complete this record. Judge Glanville is a necessary witness in by the way, Bumpus saying, and even Copeland saying, nothing super important happened off the record is not necessarily their call to make, right? If you're the defense attorneys, you'll say, well, I'm going to have to decide at this point what's important and what's not. So I'm going to have to ask everybody what was said. I'm going to have to, take their deposition or question them at trial or some kind of hearing. And I'll decide if it's Brady or if it's important to my client, because you don't represent my client. And that's also fair as well. So that's something that could be argued by Steele. Glanville is a necessary witness in Mr. Williams' trial, and his name will be used when undersigned counsel cross-examines Mr. Copeland when asking questions. Whether Judge Glanville pressured Mr. Copeland to testify, whether Mr. Copeland realized Glanville was allowing wrong propositions of law to be explained to him, and the fact that Judge Glanville condoned Mr. Copeland's lying under oath unless it was a bold-faced whopper. He likes that quote. And this is also another important part. Like, people sometimes are like, our lawyers are being a little rude or presumptuous to tell a judge what to do. Lawyers instruct judges all the time or argue what they think the law is, how they think it should go, what they think the jury instructions are. Judges are supposed to figure out what lawyers write, read the research, do their own research, and make a call. It's not disrespectful for a lawyer to disagree with a judge. So the fact that they think Glanville described the law wrong to Copeland, if this was an open court, they would have had their opportunity to make their argument on the record, do their research, and have the judge make a call, but they weren't afforded that opportunity because it was an ex parte hearing. Grounds for recusal are contained in OCGA 1518, as well as Georgia Code of Judicial Conduct. The judge should be disqualified for bias against a party if such bias stems from an extrajudicial source and results in an opinion on the merits on some basis other than what the judge learned from his participation in the case. The alleged bias of the judge must be of such a nature and intensity to prevent Mr. William from obtaining a trial influenced by the judge's bias. Do you think we've gotten there in this case with what you've seen?
I think we have, but I want to wait to balance my argument when we read the prosecution's response.
Okay.
But yes, I think we have. Absolutely.
In the case at bar, it's impossible to honestly find that Judge Glanville is an impartial, fair jurist. Recusal is mandated. The judge must avoid all impropriety as well as the appearance of impropriety. Judges shall disqualify themselves in proceedings in which their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. The fact that Judge Glanville's impartiality might reasonably be questioned is grounds to mandate that he is removed from this case. Talk about the rule to disqualify the judge. Similar arguments that they've made before. They should disclose on the record if something like this happens. Impartiality might reasonably be questioned means a reasonable perception of lack of impartiality by the judge held by a fair-minded and impartial person based on objective fact or reasonable inference. Recusal on this ground requires a rational basis for such questioning, not an arbitrary basis, even though no actual impropriety on the part of the judge has been shown. And he's citing a case there. As seen in Exhibit A, Judge Glanville's impartiality under this definition has been satisfied. Further, the Code of Judicial Conduct mandates that the judge step down from presiding over a case where the judge is likely to be a real and essential witness and where this is not substantially the same testimony available from another witness. So that's interesting. Do you think that Glanville could argue it's substantially the same as what the other people in the room could testify to?
No, because he's a judge. And I think his position is different.
Yeah.
And if you don't recuse him, the other people are going to testify about what happened in his courtroom, in his hearing room, and he's going to be sitting up there on the bench. You just can't have it both ways. Either he's going to testify as a witness and he's got to be off, because you just can't say, yeah, Judge Glanville was there. Yeah, he allowed this to go on. And then he's going to be sitting up on the bench looking at the jury smiling, going, You just can't let that happen.
And then this last part, Glanville's out, except when he's called to testify, questioning his misconduct and bias before the jury. He can come back for that. That's what Steele says. Then he repeats bias and prejudgment, prejudice against Mr. Williams. He asks this honorable court to have a hearing. The judge is so involved in the controversy that his objectivity can be reasonably questioned, and he must be removed. The facts are so clear that Glanville, in order to shield himself and his co-prosecutors, so again, he's calling all three of them prosecutors together from
Right.
the
In other words, using he found another way to say it.
denied Mr. Williams' June 17, 2024 motion to recuse without a hearing, without providing a transcript, and without permitting another court to hear the motion to recuse dated Monday, June 17, 2024. This demonstrates that Judge Glanville is involved in this controversy and cannot be deemed fair and impartial. I definitely think he is so inextricably intertwined at this point that something needs to change. And I don't really think that he could stay on this case for a number of reasons, which we'll talk about later. Bias against a defendant, it feels like he's more biased against Mr. Steele potentially than Mr. Williams. The rules of disqualification are in play. Glanville is required to avoid not just impropriety, but the appearance of impropriety in his actions. This is because public confidence in and respect for the judiciary and our courts must be maintained. As shown in Exhibit A, attached here too, the shocking conduct of Lawyer Love, Hilton, and Glanville proves that bias and prejudice have been shown. It has been held to be elementary that a judge must be disqualified when he's going to be a witness in the same proceeding. In the case, Sub-Justice Glanville has taken on the prosecutorial role against Mr. Williams and must be recused. Circumstances illustrate perfectly the inescapable conclusion that Glanville is partial to the prosecution, biased against Mr. Williams. Glanville attempted to cover up the meeting. Okay, we've read that a couple times. All the actions taken by Glanville after this ripe and valid recusal motions were filed are void. Glanville has caused Mr. Williams immeasurable suffering and prejudice based upon his, Love, and Hilton's denial of Mr. Williams' statutory and constitutional rights stated herein. Mr. Williams must be granted a reasonable bond. Here we go. This is an additional argument here. Mr. Williams' statutory right to a speedy trial has been totally upended by Love and Hilton and Glanville, and Williams must be cleared of all baseless charges. So interesting to call the charges baseless. This doesn't prove that they're baseless, but what do you think of that comment?
Well, I think he's if you notice, it's not the theme of the motion. He stuck it in here, but he hasn't repeatedly asked for the charges to be dismissed. This is a step-by-step process. So first you get him recused, and then the trial has to be continued. There has to be a mistrial. After the mistrial is declared, you ask for a bond because he shouldn't be held in jail. It's not his fault that things are still dragging on like this.
You better believe they're going to make a double jeopardy argument.
Right. And then when the mistrial is granted, they will say, well, the mistrial, my client was put in jeopardy. There was evidence presented against my client. He was not found guilty. And therefore, under the constitutional double jeopardy rules, the case should be dismissed because it's not his fault. It's prosecutorial misconduct that caused the mistrial. And so this sentence basically is foretelling the future and what the next couple of motions are going to be. And again, we should take this one step at a time because that's the way the courts want you to do it.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Morgan asked why it's called a star chamber meeting.
Many of you maybe, if you're older, you know there were movies and stuff about star chambers where they used to have, in England, they used to have secret court hearings that nobody knew about, where people were found guilty and sent to prison and no one even knew there was a trial. And they called those star chambers. And so, again, this is an ancient term that's just being carried through by Mr. Steele.
But I think it's a pointed term, right? When he's talking about the justice system in Georgia and America, it's because we don't do it that way, right?
That's
We
right.
stand on different principles of transparency and public exposure. If the public wants to see, they can see these public proceedings, right? That's why I think he's using that verbiage.
Oh, absolutely. But you're right. The younger viewers may not be familiar with the star chamber verbiage.
Reese's mom, didn't the judge only change the nature of Steele's contempt sentence because of the input of the prosecutors, more biased toward the prosecutors? I actually think he was educated by Steele's attorneys and he ended up like kind of figuring out where he needed to land there. But either way, it's clear he didn't quite know exactly how to do it when he first held him in contempt. What's happening with the jurors? Do you really think they don't know what's going on? It sucks. I mean, at this point, they're just like, hey, guys, chill for a month in the middle of this trial.
Or a couple months, go to work for 2 months, then tell your boss you're going to be gone for another couple of months.
It's hard enough to remember the evidence at the beginning of a trial. Imagine evidence from a year ago.
I know this is terrible. It's terrible for everybody. I mean, it's not just terrible for one side, but you think there's no person involved in this trial that isn't suffering because of this.
So Nikki said, does anyone know if a witness is offered immunity or are they required to accept it? So they can't plead the fifth anymore because it's no longer potentially incriminated if they've been granted immunity. That's the big connection here. All right. Do you think the DA will be disqualified or you want to wait until we read their motion before we talk about that?
Well, I want to read their motion. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's
All
go
right,
through their motion.
let's keep going here. Attached joint affidavit A
Makes
supports
sense.
this recusal motion. Glanville's extrajudicial misconduct cannot be ignored. Glanville, Love, and Hilton have worked in lockstep to ensure that Mr. Williams' constitutional and statutory rights to a fair trial, impartial tribunal, due process, right to be present at all critical stages of his trial under the federal constitution, as well as Article 1, Section 1, paragraph 12 of the Georgia Constitution, right to cross-examine, right to present a defense, right to effective assisted counsel, right to assist counsel have all been crushed. This trial is a farce. So he basically hits every single thing that's literally the kitchen sink. Denying this motion to recuse and permitting Judge Glanville to continue as a judge perpetuates injustice. This case can never return to constitutional normalcy based solely upon the improper misconduct of Love, Hilton, and Glanville. Any tragic conviction and sentence in this case will likely be reversed. And again, that's more money, more time, more resources. Judge Glanville has made himself a necessary witness as has lawyer Love and Hilton. Should Judge Glanville not recuse, Mr. Williams would be prevented from exercising his constitutional right to call witnesses, as Mr. Williams needs to show the jury how and why Love, Hilton, and Glanville were not just doing their jobs as public officials, but we're teaming up with a united front to convict Mr. Williams.
Again, another way of saying it. I mean, I say he just says it 50 different ways in this motion.
You have to.
Once armed with this evidence, the jurors can then properly determine what, if any, of the testimony and these facts will bear on their verdicts. Judge Glanville must be removed. So I do agree, like, this stuff needs to go in front of the jury, and the jury's going to determine how serious it is. All right, this is more repetition about the initial motion to recuse. Before the jury, Judge Glanville will be spoken about in terms of work as a member of the prosecution team. Judge Glanville will be called as a witness by Mr. Williams. So he's saying he's going to argue that to the jury. Do you think that's, let's say Judge Glanville stays on, can the defense still make that argument?
Yes, I mean, that's why he can't stay on. If they're allowed to make the argument, which is reasonable, he can't stay on, because how can the jury possibly be fair when they're told this judge who they respect and who's making all the rulings is also part of the prosecution team? How can you get a fair trial?
And like, talk about how they could question Copeland about this. At the very least, they can cross-examine Copeland and ask him stuff about Judge Glanville, right?
Oh, sure. Were you intimidated? How many people were in the room? You know, what was going on? Were you in handcuffs? These are all things that have been raised in other contexts, and just to show what the room was like. And Attorney Bumpus, she'll be testifying about what Glanville said and did in that room. So I definitely think that there's just no way to proceed and cross-examine Copeland with Glanville being there in the room and being the judge.
Reese's mom says, I could see jury nullification in this trial. I'd be pretty angry juror at this point. So the jurors don't know about 90% of this, which is so interesting. But if Glanville stays on the case, I think at least some of this is going to come before the jury, and they're going to figure out some of the problems and shenanigans that are going on. And that's the other thing. This trial almost can't continue, which is kind of sad. But to bring all this up, and then the jury's thinking, is that why we've been out for a month? Because the defense thinks the judge did something wrong, and the prosecutors did something wrong in the secret meeting, and these arguments start to be made. It just becomes so messy. And there's a reason these types of arguments don't usually come out of trial.
Right. And if you're a juror, you're going to think the defense is all full of hooey if the judge is still sitting up there, this Glanville, the guy they say has done all these wrong things, yet he's still sitting up there as the judge. Boy, obviously the defense is just, full of caca.
Glanville has given lawyer Love, Hilton, and Bumpus and witness Copeland legal advice. Mr. Williams, jurors need to understand who has been orchestrating this kangaroo court.
Let's stop for a second.
Yeah.
Notice how he talks about Bumpus. This jumped out at me. These aren't mistakes. It's lawyer Love, lawyer Hilton, and honorable attorney Bumpus. Where has he ever said that about anybody else in this motion? It was not an accident.
Yeah, and I mean, he's making it very clear, almost like a threat to the judge. We're going to make these arguments, whether you like it or not. As attested to in Exhibit A, Judge Glanville received extrajudicial information and also gave opinions and legal advice that included, but are not limited to, that Mr. Copeland went to prison for crimes committed on behalf of YSL, a contested fact in this trial. Mr. Williams and their other co-indictees know Mr. Copeland and his criminal conduct that is not known to Judge Glanville or the prosecutors. 3, Mr. Copeland will be cross-examined on his other crimes evidence because Mr. Williams and the co-indictees have far greater knowledge of Mr. Copeland and his background than others. And 4, the like, by embracing this extrajudicial information, Judge Glanville believes that Mr. Williams is involved in criminal activity with Mr. Copeland, and Judge Glanville expressed that fact to Copeland in order to push Copeland to testify against Mr. Williams. This is a pretty good argument. Don't you think? I mean, it's a pretty good argument that the judge feels like there's a bunch of criminals sitting in the courtroom.
Oh, yeah. I mean, let's face it, he probably did before he met Copeland. But, after talking to Copeland, they have some concrete evidence now that he does know. So, yeah, it's all going into what's in Glanville's head. Can they get into his head? And is there enough there to get him off the case? And I think, again, I agree that there is, but I've been wrong before.
These conclusions regarding facts that are in dispute about Mr. Williams' guilt mandate Judge Glanville be removed. Moreover, Glanville's derogatory and prejudicial statements and demeanor must be considered by this honorable court as attached to Exhibit A. Again, we saw a lot of videos of those between the exchanges between Glanville and Steele. Glanville had an ethical duty to disqualify himself in this matter, as he clearly has a personal bias and prejudice concerning Mr. Williams and the other co-indictees. Mr. Williams' counsel and other defense lawyers in this case, Judge Glanville has violated his oath by not voluntarily disqualifying himself to avoid this impropriety and appearance of impropriety. Instead, Glanville, Lawyer Love, and Lawyer Hilton have manufactured an unfair, unconstitutional, broken trial and has caused Mr. Williams severe prejudice by incarceration for over 2 years without bond and a laughable trial that has lasted entirely too long with the games played by Lawyer Love, Hilton, Judge Glanville. Judge Glanville must be removed. The instances discussed herein, as well as Exhibit A, represent more than mere friction between zealous counsel and a diligent jurist, because he knows that's what Glanville has said in the past, and he wants to take that type of a argument or statement away from the presiding judge. Right?
Yes. I'm sorry.
I didn't know if you were going to say anything about that. Okay.
No. Sorry.
Glanville's conduct created a realistic impression that he has harbored an inclination to be biased against Mr. Williams and partial towards Lawyer Love and Hilton and the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Although proven, this honorable court need not decipher whether such bias or impartiality actually existed, because Glanville was ethically bound to disqualify himself whenever his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. You got something?
Yeah, that's an important point. What's going on here? Steele is raising the conduct in the courtroom, the disagreements they had in the courtroom, arguments, objections that were sustained by the judge or overruled by the judge. Those normally don't fly as far as bias or prejudice. They really don't. The only thing he's really got any concrete chance of winning here is that ex parte hearing. I mean, he throws all this in to show bias and prejudice, but again, I was watching that. I've had judges treat me a lot worse than Glanville was treating Steele. I mean, I have. So that in itself is not enough, but he has to rely on this ex parte. This other stuff is good. It's nice window dressing, but it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah. To me, that's why you build all that up, because individually that stuff is not enough, like we've been talking about. As annoying as it may be, as frustrating as it may be, but it's not enough on its own.
Right.
He should be disqualified from any contact with this case moving forward based on this prejudice. As cited above, the ex parte is the big thing, obviously. As cited above, ex parte communications are presumptively harmful error. State has the burden of rebutting this. They'll become evidence before the jury. In order to attempt to explain this injustice to the trier of fact, Judge Glanville, Love, Hilton will become witnesses. Mr. Williams is entitled to know these communications between Glanville, Love, Hilton, and Mr. Copeland. So I have a question for you. Do you think if this gets mistried and they try it again, and the state in that case, let's say that this state gets booted off the case, and the new state attorney wants to call Copeland, do you think it's appropriate for the defense to call Love, Hilton, and Glanville to talk about how Copeland in another proceeding was not going to testify, but now he's here testifying? Does this have anything to do with judges and prosecutors in other jurisdictions forcing him to testify?
I think what they'll do is fashion the question so it does not refer to a prior trial. What they'll do is they'll fashion.
You think they'll be able to bring this in?
Yes, they'll be able to bring this in. Hey, you didn't want to testify, did you? You were forced to testify, weren't you? In fact, when they were talking to you about testifying, you say that you're nothing but a liar. They can ask all that. They just can't say, well, weren't you in a trial before where you were a witness? That'll be excluded. But how he got here and why he's testifying, that can all come in, yes.
So my specific question is, do you think they would call Glanville, Love, and Hilton?
I think they'll try, yeah.
I know, but I think based on what you're saying, another judge may find that it's not relevant to call them three, but I definitely think the defense can get into that subject matter. So it kind of leaves an open question. Will Glanville, Hilton, and Love be a witness in a future trial where they're not the judges and the prosecutors?
Well, another question too is it also depends on how Copeland answers the questions.
Right.
If Copeland answers the questions that lays out exactly what the defense wants, and there's no reason to call Glanville or the prosecutors, then that's a different situation. If Copeland lies about what happened in that hearing or doesn't remember, which is a very common Copeland answer, then yes, there's going to be an issue, and they may be able to call him for witnesses.
Oh gosh, that would be crazy. Glanville, Hilton, and Love have stolen forever Mr. Williams' opportunity to have this trial heard by a jury in a constitutional and statutory firm manner. I don't disagree. This is almost getting to the point where this doesn't even look like a jury trial. Judge Glanville, Hilton, and Love have goaded Mr. Williams into moving for mistrials. All of the conduct in all proceedings after the Honorable Douglas Weinstein's, as well as undersigned counsels, filed their motion to recuse and affidavits are deemed invalid and have no effect. Mr. Williams' constitutional and statutory right to a speedy trial has been stomped on by Glanville, as well as Mr. Williams' right to due process, fair tribunal, et cetera, all of the things that have been stepped on before. He talks about his affidavit, how it sets out everything they need for this motion, to talk about how he's violated his oath of office. As explained above, ex parte communications. Ali said he thinks the judge or the jury has already heard about this. I don't think they've heard about this specifically, but I could be wrong. As explained above, ex parte communications are presumed to be error. And once Mr. Williams has shown that Judge Glanville received ex parte communications, there is a presumption of harm that can only be overcome by affirmatively showing that Glanville did not consider these communications. Their conduct is reprehensible. Glanville has never affirmatively stated that he has not considered these ex parte communications.
Let's stop there. Let's stop there. That's very important. The reason they put that in there is because if you remember in their prior case law that they cited, they said that it can be overcome if the judge says that whatever happened in those ex parte communications, I didn't take into consideration, I don't even remember what was said, and it has no effect on my decisions. By the judge saying that, he can minimize the impact of the prejudice or the harm from the ex parte communications. And this is very important that Glanville has never said this. And they're going to beat him over the head with the fact that he's never said this.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like he could have said it, I guess. It's just kind of weird in these circumstances. Like it's all about a witness's decision. It's kind of weird that the judge was involved at all, to be honest with you. Like outside of holding him in contempt, what does the judge have to do with any of this?
Right.
Yep.
Lawyer Hilton and Love have never uttered a syllable denouncing these ex parte communications. Instead, they promote the propriety of the ex parte communications. State cannot refute this presumption of harm, even though that's how the process works, and they have to. Supposed public officials, again, he throws that slight out there. Glanville had a duty to recuse himself, which we've heard about a lot. Law also requires this honorable court to recuse. The public must believe in the absolute integrity and impartiality of judges.
Now, here we're talking about the current judge. We're not talking about Glanville anymore.
Oh, this is
the judge that's
so when he says this, now we're talking about Krause.
Right, we're talking about Krause here.
So Glanville, Reese's mom said, if Glanville is not recused, how can they possibly go forward with a fair trial? I mean, I just don't see how it happens.
I don't either.
Honestly, I don't see how it happens. Didi, can they argue the state immunity won't protect Woody from federal crime?
Yes.
So I don't know if that's something that the defense is necessarily going to argue, but that's one of the improper instructions of law that happened in the ex parte communication. Do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Well, here is, and we'll talk more about this when in the state's argument when they do their response. But the key is, it is not Steele or Williams' rights that were violated by the Fifth Amendment issue. That's Woody. Williams was violated because he wasn't told about the Woody issues, and he couldn't use it for Brady and for cross-examination. But the immunity issue is strictly a Woody issue. And so if this issue, the argument is Woody's argument, not Williams, that the Fifth Amendment doesn't cover, at least the immunity that he got in state court doesn't cover his federal crimes. Woody could argue that. And like you just said, Peter, this is one of the mistakes that were made, and we pointed this out when we went through the transcript, is these are the mistakes they made when they tried to give him legal advice about his immunity. They were wrong about the federal crimes. So yes, the answer is the immunity will not protect him from federal crimes.
The Supreme Court of Georgia observed that our JQC has opined that a judge in a particular court should never preside over a matter concerning another judge from the same circuit.
Okay, if I could interrupt you here for a second. I read Smith versus Guest Pond Club because I was curious. That's the case they cite for this proposition. And it was a really interesting case. And if you got just a minute, I'll tell you about it. Is that what it was in a county where I guess the county is not big enough to have full-time judges. So there were two part-time judges. They were lawyers one day, or they were judges another day when they needed judges. Well, one was the lawyer in the case and the other was the judge in the case. And what happens is they're the only two juvenile court judges in this county. So they confer on cases all the time. And when they're elevated to Superior Court, before they can go to Superior Court, the other judge has to okay it. So one judge who was sitting in this case had to be okayed to be the judge in that case, where the other party in the case was represented by the other judge in his capacity as a private lawyer. I mean, they were so intertwined in this small county that the judge said you had to find somebody else outside this county to hear this motion. It was a very interesting set of facts.
All right. I saw in the chat as well that some people said that our mics are not exactly the same. So to turn yours down or turn mine up. So I tried to adjust them a little bit. Hopefully that helps. No, you're fine. Just, you don't have to lean in. No, yours.
Okay.
They were saying yours was loud. So we're good. We're good.
Oh, okay.
Furthermore, this honorable court has received a $2,000 donation in its reelection campaign
Wow,
in
2,000.
April during the pendency of the trial. Glanville giving this contribution for reelection could be deemed an exceptionally large campaign contribution, and thus is another reason this honorable court must recuse from presiding over this case. And that's basically the end. Okay. So then there's, 200 pages of attachments that we're not going to go through, but it's affidavits. It's the transcript of the ex parte hearing. It's everything that they have to support this motion for recusal. So I'm going to throw this question up for you, Dad. Rosie said, how is what the state is doing by gifting immunity not witness tampering / coercion? You answer that while I bring up the state's motion here.
Well, it is because they are the government and they are the Supremes. They are allowed to give immunity to witnesses so that they can get to the truth. That's the theory behind immunity. So if someone's willing to testify, but they don't want to testify because they're worried about getting arrested for something, and the government believes their testimony is important, they can give them immunity so that they give them immunity so they can catch the bigger guys. And you can see where in some cases it's necessary to give immunity to the little guys in order to catch the big guys. And the government has that discretion to do that. Otherwise, a lot of crime would go unpunished if little guys couldn't testify against the big guys. That's the theory.
And there are some people that are like, some accountant whose family gets threatened and he does some illegal acts for, the cartel or something. It's like, you want that guy to testify against the cartel. You can understand more how he got himself in this situation, whatever it may be. You've seen it in movies. That stuff happens in real life sometimes too, where people get into bad situations. They're granted immunity so they can testify to help get the real bad guys. All right. State's response to defendant's motion to recuse Chief Judge Glanville in the trial of the above style case. Midway through this now months-long trial, defendant Jeffrey Williams and defendant Kendrick have each filed a motion to recuse. The state recognizes Chief Judge Glanville has reassigned the motion and that it has been properly reassigned to this honorable court. And of course, because they say it's properly assigned to this honorable court, but the state respectfully submits that at the time of reassignment, Chief Judge Glanville did not make the three requisite determinations, whether the motion was timely, whether any affidavit made in support of the motion is legally sufficient, and whether if some or all of the facts set forth in the affidavit are true, recusal is authorized. Accordingly, it falls to this honorable court to make those determinations. As set forth below, though defendant's motion and supplement are in part timely, and the affidavits in support of defendant's motion and supplement are in part legally sufficient, none of the facts set forth in defendant's affidavits, even if assumed to be true, would authorize recusal. Defendant's motion and supplement should therefore both be denied. That feels like insanity to me. To say that, nope, they don't quite rise to the level of recusal, even if everything they said was true. I mean, that's crazy. To say that what they said is not true is one thing. But to say, even if all that is true, the judge shouldn't recuse himself. Oof. I'd hate to see what she thinks does warrant a recusal.
They have made, what they've done as we go through this, they've backtracked a little bit and they've made the best argument they can because their other arguments have just turned into mush.
Procedural.
Yes, their procedural arguments and their factual arguments have turned into mush. As we go through, and I'll say it now because we can look through as we go through. You remember the emergency nature of this ex parte hearing? Well, when you read through this, I want you to look for where they allege there was an emergency and what the facts of the emergency were, because I don't think you're going to find it in this motion. I think they totally left that out, and I think they were smart to do that. They left out the emergency nature because there was no emergency, and they're honing in on the one aspect that I touched on before, which is the defense doesn't have any rights here. These are Copeland's rights, not the defendant's rights. So we're only protecting Copeland's rights. Therefore, the defendants really are not prejudiced because none of their rights were affected by this ex parte hearing. And it's a pretty good argument. I mean, the fact they've narrowed in on that and forgot about all the garbage they used to talk about, they really did a better job than I thought they were going to do.
All right. On June 6th, the calling of state's witness Kenneth Copeland on June 7th. On June 6th, in response to an inquiry from counsel for the defendants in this case, the state announced that Kenneth Copeland would be the state's next witness and would be called to testify on June 7th. After the announcement, the state received an email from John Melnick claiming to represent Kenneth Copeland and instructing the state to cease communication with Mr. Copeland and that Mr. Copeland would be asserting his Fifth Amendment privilege. First off, claiming to represent him, that's not how that works. Like, he represents him. If he calls and says, I represent Kenneth Copeland, he represents him.
And he absolutely does.
Agreement in most situations for criminal cases.
And the record shows he represents it.
If called to testify on June 7th, perplexingly, given that Mr. Copeland was being called to testify against Jeffrey Williams and Shannon Stillwell, who are represented respectively by Brian Steele and Max Shart, Melnick copied Brian Steele and Max Shart in his communication with the state regarding Mr. Copeland's intention not to testify. So my other first thought here is, just because the state is calling a witness does not mean they're testifying against the defendants, right? Sometimes state calls friendly witnesses. Sometimes witnesses become friendly and the state might not know it. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, there's wrong.
No, well, it's wrong when this, it's wrong because the state wants to have all the advantages. The state wants to make sure they control everything.
Hi,
and
everyone.
it bothers the state when they don't control everything. It bothers the state when people aren't scared of them. It bothers the state when people don't do what they say. When you read this motion, you'll see that's what bothers them is, look, they didn't do anything illegal. They didn't do anything wrong. They didn't do anything unethical. It's just they didn't do what we wanted them to do. And Melnick isn't acting like we want Melnick to act. So therefore, we're going to condemn Melnick. But Melnick did everything right, and he didn't do anything wrong in this case. But they're going to jump on him. And you'll see another spot where they jump on him here because, again, they didn't kowtow to the state. And that's what bothers them.
And what I was going to say is it's wrong if a witness is lying and changing their testimony, but it's not wrong if the state thinks that they're testifying against the defense and actually they're not because they're just telling the truth. That happened in the Karen Reed trial, I think, with some of the witnesses. All right. In preparation for trial, Deputy District Attorney Hilton, along with her investigator, had met with Mr. Copeland on multiple occasions, and at no time did Mr. Copeland state an intention to plead the Fifth or to say that he was represented by Mr. Melnick. He doesn't have to tell them that, first off.
No.
He doesn't have to tell them. And he can also change his mind, and he can tell them right before he testifies, actually, I've changed my mind. I'm going to plead the Fifth. There's nothing wrong with that. If he thinks he's going to incriminate himself, of course. Nevertheless, after receiving Mr. Melnick's email, Deputy Hilton ceased communication with Mr. Copeland until June 7th. He also doesn't have to tell her if he has a lawyer or not, but if he does, then she's got to stop. Pursuant to OCGA.
And frankly, you know what? I mean, I don't know. I think they're on notice that Melnick represented Copeland. I think they knew that from prior cases where Melnick was Copeland's lawyer in the prior case. The judge certainly believed that Melnick and Bumpus represented Copeland. So, you know, they should have made an inquiry. I think they had an ethical duty to inquire Mr. Copeland if he had an attorney, not just be silent about it.
Yeah. Well, they don't want to know, right? They just want to talk to him, force him to
That's
say
right.
what they want him to say.
They
After
didn't wanna
receiving
know.
what?
They didn't want to know. And again, they're upset because Melnick, the state, the prosecutors were always upset. You know, defense lawyers are never their friends. And they're upset because Copeland met with him and then Copeland said, I'm not talking.
After receiving Melnick's email, the state presented to Chief Judge Glanville, a motion to compel the testimony of Copeland, extending immunity to Copeland for his testimony, and told Copeland and to hold Copeland in contempt should Copeland refuse to testify after being ordered to do so by the court after being granted immunity. Court issued an order granting the state's motion. On June 7th, after the court was called to order, Melnick appeared before the court and informed the court that Copeland would be asserting his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination in the presence of each defendant currently on trial and each of their respective attorneys. Chief Judge Glanville called Mr. Copeland to the stand and explained to Mr. Copeland that the state had sought and granted an order of the court pursuant to OCGA 24507, directing Copeland to testify and extending immunity for Copeland's compelled testimony. Glanville further explained to Mr. Copeland in the presence of every defendant currently on trial and at each of their respective attorneys that should Mr. Copeland refuse to testify, he would be held in contempt of court and jailed until he purged himself of the contempt by testifying in court. Now, what she's trying to do is say any prejudice that happened in the ex parte communication was cured because all of these conversations happened in open court in front of all the defendants.
Right. It was harmless error.
Right.
We were talking about harm. It was harmless error. And the second thing is, it was Copeland's constitutional rights we're dealing with, not Williams or any of those defendants. So that's where they're going.
Mr. Copeland, thereafter stated his intention to testify, and Mr. Melnick looked toward Mr. Steele and Mr. Shart and shrugged his shoulders. After, again, they're assigning motive there to the shoulder shrug.
I know it.
After motions hearings, the court recessed for lunch. During the lunch hour, Mr. Melnick spoke with counsel for the defendants, but at no time attempted to communicate with the state. After lunch, the jury was called in and Mr. Copeland took the stand. Mr. Copeland cheekily answered a few questions, and when asked his age and years, Mr. Copeland responded, "I plead the fifth." The court allowed no further questioning by the state and immediately excused the jury, held Mr. Copeland in contempt, and ordered Mr. Copeland into custody in open sorry, I just lost my place. In open court, in the presence of all the defendants currently on trial and in the presence of each defendant's respective attorneys, Chief Judge Glanville informed Mr. Copeland and Mr. Melnick that he would bring Mr. Copeland back into court on Monday, June 10th, to allow Mr. Copeland to purge himself of this contempt by testifying. Mr. Melnick, purge himself just means he can get out of prison, get out of jail. His sentence is gone. Contempt is gone if he just does what the court wants him to do. Melnick announced he was going on vacation, would in no way be present on Monday, would appoint standing counsel Kayla Bumpus to represent Copeland in court the following Monday. June 10th meeting regarding contempt proceedings initiated against Copeland upon motion of the state, attended by counsel for Kenneth Copeland, attorneys for the state, and Honorable Chief Judge Glanville. You know what she doesn't call it?
Ex parte.
Exactly.
Now, that's right. Look before.
Star chamber out there.
And look at the second line. She calls it an in-chambers meeting. It's no longer ex parte meeting.
On Monday morning, prior to the start of court, the state requested from the court an in-chambers meeting with counsel for Kenneth Copeland, the court attorneys for the state, to discuss the proceedings. Court granted state's request, and upon being directed to do so by the court reporter made a record of the entire meeting. Present during the meeting were CDDA Love, Bumpus, investigators, Glanville, Copeland, and Hilton. Matters addressed during the meeting concerned only the contempt proceedings against Mr. Copeland, and the topics addressed included Mr. Copeland's rights and representation as it relates to the proceedings, Mr. Copeland's obligations under OCGA 24507, and answers to questions posed by Mr. Copeland regarding matters related to that rule, such as the distinction between purging oneself of contempt as addressed by the rule and perjury as prohibited by the rule. With the exception of the times where Mr. Copeland was afforded an opportunity to speak with Ms. Bumpus alone, the entire meeting was taken down by the court reporter. So we don't know if that's true or not.
Well, I think I tell you right now, it's not true. I mean, just reading the transcript, there's no way the entire meeting is in that transcript. I mean, it starts out with Miss Love talking. I mean, there's no way.
Not just that, but we don't have to take her word for it, right? The defense attorney don't have to take her word for it. That's the problem. And that's why at this point, when there's a discrepancy and Bumpus is saying more was said, she's saying more wasn't said, it seems like if you read the transcript, more was said. How do you figure this stuff out? You swear them and you ask them questions, right? And you see what's conflicting testimony, and somebody decides at the end of the day what the truth is. So LB and a bunch of people are posting, yeah, this stuff happening in a bunch of cases is a little bit scary here. But that's why good defense attorneys are important, whether you like them or not. You want them to fight for rights because they're fighting for the rights of people like Young Thug. They'll fight for your rights. And these are things that could affect you in the future in a case, because it's not just Georgia. It's not just Fulton County, right? We're seeing issues all over the place in all different trials with judges, with prosecutors, with law enforcement, and with defense attorneys sometimes. Brian Steele's defiance of the court's commands and subsequent contempt ruling. Here we go. After the meeting regarding Copeland's contempt and obligations, by the way, you're right. What they don't mention here is the emergency nature, why they needed to do it, anything like that. There's no reason.
Or the fact that Copeland was had a safety concern. That's not mentioned in here. I mean, they've totally, again, I think it's the right strategy, by the way, but they've totally changed their strategy. And now the issue is that it's only Copeland's rights affected and nobody else's. Therefore, no one has a right to challenge anything that happened in this ex parte here. That's their theory, and I think it's the best one they've got.
The problem is, when you read this, it makes no sense why they couldn't have done this in front of the defense attorneys.
No.
Absolutely no sense. They almost make it seem like we had the same hearing behind closed doors that we already had in front of all the lawyers. So then why? That's not true. We know that's not true because you wouldn't have asked for an in-chambers ex parte hearing and meeting if you thought it was the same as what you've already done in open court, right? We all know that. Come on.
And they don't really justify why they asked for an in-camera hearing. They just say they asked for one. I mean, there's no real reason.
Right, exactly. All right, Steele stood up in open court and demanded a mistrial as he loudly and repeatedly hurled at the Chief Judge Glanville accusations of misconduct. Oh, he didn't just do it in court. He did it in black and white that we just read. Most disturbingly, after accusing the court of illegal activity, Mr. Steele repeatedly disobeyed the Chief Judge Glanville's commands to reveal Mr. Steele's source of the information regarding the in-chamber matters. After Mr. Steele refused to comply with the court's instruction, the court held Mr. Steele in contempt of court. After defiantly and repeatedly disobeying the court and being held in contempt of court, Brian Steele filed his motion and supplement. I mean, this is, folks, like, some people don't like when you get your rights. Some people don't like when people stand up and fight for their rights. They want you to roll over. They want you to be controlled by them. They want to scare you. They want to use their power and influence and position over you. It happens.
I know that it may be hard to see, but if you look at this, you got to realize the state really had no axe to grind when it came to Steele being held in contempt. That was just between him and the judge. And Steele didn't answer the question. The judge held him in contempt. State had no involvement in that, yet they want to insert themselves because they want to, again, slam another defense lawyer and paint them as obstructionists and paint them as irrational.
And by the way,
they really had, they had no axe to grind with Steele.
And by the way, not all prosecutors are like this. So we're not saying every prosecutor is like this.
No.
We're not saying
I was a prosecutor and I was a wonderful guy.
I don't know if everybody would agree with that. I don't know if defense attorneys would agree with that. But not all prosecutors, not all judges, not all law enforcement's like this. Okay. And that's why we're highlighting these exceptions, and we need to get rid of these exceptions or correct them. Right. And hopefully they can do better in the future. That's really the point of highlighting this and talking about this. And if you remember, we were a bit shocked at how respectful and calm Steele was throughout this entire process. He could have blown his gasket. The man was thrown in jail. He took off his tie in the middle of a trial to be thrown in jail. And he was pretty respectful and calm, I would say.
Yeah.
Somebody that's not as calm.
Even when he was being let out, heading for the holding cell, he asked the judge permission to speak. I remember that. He didn't just blurt it out. He said, "Judge, can I say something?"
Yes,
exactly.
exactly.
The judge goes, "Yes." And he said, "Okay." And then he said something. He made another motion for mistrial. But, he was respectful.
All right. Argument and citation of authority. No fact set forth in the defendant's motion or supplement authorizes the recusal of the judge. To warrant disqualification of a trial judge, the affidavit supporting the recusal motion must give fair support to the charge of a bent of mind that may prevent or impede impartiality of judgment. To be disqualifying, the alleged bias must stem from an extrajudicial source and result in an opinion on the merits on some basis other than what the judge learned from his participation in this case. There is a presumption that a trial judge acting as a public official, again, as Mr. Steele would say, faithfully and lawfully performs the duties devolving upon him. Determining whether an affidavit supporting a motion to recuse is legally sufficient and whether the facts asserted authorize recusal present questions of law. Here, with the exception of defendant Williams' untimely allegation regarding a single instance where Mr. Steele was chided by the court for not being prepared, defendant's motion and the supplement are based entirely on the defendant's assertions regarding the June 10th, 2024 meeting, regarding the contempt proceedings against Kenneth Copeland and actions taken by Chief Judge Glanville and after Mr. Steele defiantly refused to comply with the court's repeated request to provide the court with information. Do you have something?
I was just going to say, when you get down now to the, however, no defendant, capitalized, this is the key to their argument right here. In one sentence, they synthesize what the argument is and what their argument is going to be for the judge to deny this motion.
Georgia Code of Judicial Conduct 2.9 regarding ex parte communications provides that judges shall accord to every person who has a legal interest in the proceeding or that person's lawyer the right to be heard according to the law. However, no defendant on trial in this case had or has any legal interest in or any standing to be involved in the state's motion to compel the testimony of Kenneth Copeland or any subsequent contempt proceeding initiated on motion of the state involving Kenneth Copeland's refusal to testify. Since no defendant in this case had a right to be present at the June 10th in chambers meeting with Kenneth Copeland and his counsel regarding the contempt proceedings against Kenneth Copeland, the fact that the meeting provides no grounds for recusal of Chief Judge Glanville. All right, so go ahead. Explain why you think that's a good argument.
Well, that's the key. The key is, now I don't care what happened in this case, they cannot file a motion because they have no standing to complain because their rights were not affected. The only person's rights that were affected in this in-camera, ex-parte, whatever you want to call it, were Copeland's rights. So the defendants had no rights there. If they had no rights affected, then there is no recusal. They had no right to be in that meeting. Now, we've seen from Steele's motion that what they're saying was affected was their rights to Brady, cross-examination, all of that was affected by the fact that they couldn't be there. They never said the reason why the defense couldn't be there. That's not addressed in their motion. They never said why they asked for it to be in camera. They never justified any of that. And without any justification, I just don't see how the courts can say that that ex parte hearing was justified and that Glanville did the right thing. He's responsible. He's the judge. He should have said, okay, why are we meeting without the defense? Explain that to me and let me rule on that before we go any further and before I hear anything that might prejudice me.
Right. And I honestly think there's no way getting around the fact that Copeland made certain admissions and Judge Glanville and the prosecutors never did or even intended to let the defendants know about that. And
Well,
I don't see how you get past that.
How about a question to Copeland? Mr. Copeland, why did you ask if you'd be immunized for murders? Were you worried about you might be indicted for a murder? What murder would that be?
There's all sorts of things in there that now that we know the content of the hearing, it's just, I don't see how you get around that personally. I just don't.
If you want to for fun, and again, I don't know if you want to or not, but the very first exhibit is the email from Melnick. I don't know if you want to read that email, but I think it's interesting email.
All right, we'll go through it quick just because we don't have a ton of time here.
I know we've been long, I know, but
My concern is for my client. Had I been involved, I would have demanded a much more specific immunity deal. You need him much more than he needs you. You've put him in a terrible position where you know his life is in danger, whether in custody or on the street. He's a marked man from this point forward. Go F yourself if you think I'm doing anything else besides protecting my client. And this was in response to Ms. Love saying, is your concern for your client or Mr. Steele and Mr. Shards?
Right. So, good response.
That's what Melnick referenced. Oh, I just read that. I thought it was still on screen. It's not.
Oh.
The email. What happens to Mr. Steele's contempt sentence? He's on bond, but nothing decided yet. I haven't seen anything decided on that. Have you?
No, nothing. In fact, the judge didn't say a word about it.
Okay. And lastly, Ash said that Judge Krause has already responded to Steele's motion for her recusal and denied it. She will be the judge presiding over Glanville's recusal. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I would think that to me, the safest way would be for her to say, let's send it out of this circuit. Let's send it to another county. That's just the safest way to do it. And why not do it the safest way?
I'm not surprised one bit, but it is unfortunate because it's like people have lost the ability. And I was just talking about this somebody with the other day, but like conflict of interest is not a personal attack. I'm not attacking your character. What I'm saying is there's either an appearance of impropriety or you'll be put in a position that's unfair and you shouldn't be put in. So let's just conflict you off the case so you don't even have to deal with it. We've had judges conflict off cases before because of relationships with us. We've had to conflict ourselves off of certain cases because of relationships with one party or another. Just do it. It's the right thing to do. You keep yourself out of trouble. But when you have the power and you can affect a friend or a colleague's position potentially, maybe you don't want them to think you're bailing on them or whatever it is. There's a lot of things going on, in my opinion, that create pressures that I think this is unfortunate personally. And again, some people get mad at me and annoyed at me on this channel when I try to stand behind the justice system and behind judges and lawyers and law enforcement, because I try to say a lot of them are really good. So if this would have been pushed out to an impartial judge, not Judge Krause, that judge would have looked at it and said he's not recused. I would have been a lot more like, okay, at least they had an impartial judge look at it. Now that it's Krause, it's going to be a lot harder for me to ever get there, in my opinion.
Well, I got to tell you too, although I think the motion should be granted, should be recused, do not be surprised if this judge denies the recusal motion. I mean, I've seen a lot of motions that I really thought this is a slam dunk. and the judge still denied it, especially recusal motions, because those are sensitive to judges.
So
So
not
don't
just
be surprised.
so not just this issue, but throughout the whole trial, if it was me, which again it's not, and I think this is a really hard decision, and it's easier for me to sit here, behind a camera and in front of a microphone to say this, as opposed to if I was really the one doing this in my county where I lived, where I was a judge. But he should be recused. These prosecutors should be off the case. This should be a mistrial. They should be able to retry this case in a different county and change venue. But once you grant that mistrial, I think the defense has a really good double jeopardy motion on their hands. So knowing all of that and the potential crimes committed and the potential evidence against these defendants, it puts judges in really difficult situations. That's why judges should be pissed off when prosecutors screw up or cut corners or cross lines. And usually they are.
Right.
All right. Any closing thoughts?
Nope, I think that's it. I think we really covered it in a lot of detail.
All right. And if we find Krause's decision, we'll take a look at it, and we will continue to do these videos on YSL if you guys like them. And if you do, hit the like button. Let us know in the comments. If you like having my dad on, let me know in the comments. We'll keep bringing him for this case because he's been following it and all the shenanigans going on.
Yeah, they're done. Thank you guys. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for that one person that liked my thing. Thank you. Bye. See you tomorrow or later or whenever. Bye.